when it's over.
I do.
How did a show about nothing go from this
You're gonna over dry it.
You can't over dry. Why not? Same reason you can't over wet. See, once something is wet, it's wet.
to this?
Is this how it ends? It can't! It can't end like this! I'm ready! Glory! Hallelujah!
Well, we're about to find out, because today we're talking about Seinfeld, the greatest sitcom of all time. Created by Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David in 1989, the show revolves around four characters in New York City, just casually going about their days, doing everyday stuff and wondering why they are terrible at romantic relationships. Basically, the show is about nothing. The main character of the show is the straight man, Jerry Seinfeld, a stand-up comedian, just like the real-life Jerry Seinfeld, who spends the majority of the show sarcastically nitpicking every flaw in society. Jerry has an ex-girlfriend named Elaine who still hangs out with him despite Jerry being the least remorseful guy on earth. Elaine is the definition of impulsive, yet she's got an IQ of 151. She works as a copy editor at more than one place throughout the show, and like Jerry, also has relationship problems. She's played by the incredibly talented Julie Louis-Dreyfus, and I'm obsessed with her. Jerry's childhood best friend, George Costanza, is another hopeless romantic. George is a self-loathing neurotic and is more intelligent than he looks, but he's unable to access his intelligence because he always has women and sex on the mind, hence why he's always so lazy. And last but not least, we have everybody's favorite character, the eccentric Kramer. Kramer is Jerry's neighbor who periodically bursts into Jerry's apartment like he lives there, which has become a reoccurring gag.
Somebody once told me.
The guy may seem like your typical idiosyncratic neighbor that's always taking your stuff and eating your food, but for all of his quirks, Kramer is one of the most kind-hearted and caring people you will ever meet. The actor who plays him, not so much. There's a lot to cover in the show, so we're only going to be covering important or iconic episodes. Let's get into it.
Every time somebody recommends a doctor, always the best. Always, is he good? Always the best.
The first episode begins with Jerry and George in a coffee shop, where Jerry's nitpicking George's shirt with a high second button. If you want a little fun fact, the first episode is called the Seinfeld Chronicles because originally the show was going to be called that, before it was shortened to just Seinfeld. Their nitpicking turns to a conversation about Laura, a woman Jerry met while on tour in Michigan, who is coming to visit Jerry in New York. They assume it's a date, but then George second guesses that it's a date after hearing Laura's exact words, which involve the words had to and maybe get together. He concludes that she only called Jerry as a backup, and George has the waitress Claire confirm his suspicions. The character, Claire, was originally going to be the lead female character in the show, hence why Elaine isn't in the first episode. But Claire wasn't well received by test audiences.
Claire, you're a woman, right?
What gave it away, George?
One trip to the laundromat later, Jerry is at home watching the taped Mets game when Kramer walks in to spoil it. Classic Kramer. In the show's first episode, Kramer was known as Kessler, as the creators had based Kramer's character off a real-life comedian, Kenny Kramer, but hadn't legally gotten his permission to use the name. I'm still gonna call him Kramer regardless. Jerry is upset at Kramer for ruining the game, and Kramer apologizes before raiding Jerry's fridge.
You done with this? No.
Laura calls Jerry, asking if she could stay at Jerry's place when her plane lands because she couldn't find a decent hotel room. Jerry immediately says yes, so maybe George's assumptions were just off. George hears this and once again reads between the lines of what Laura actually said, believing Laura now wants to sleep with Jerry and criticizes Jerry for setting up an extra bed. Kramer enters and sides with George about Laura's true intentions for wanting to stay at Jerry's place.
How's the real estate business?
It's not bad. It's coming along.
At the airport, Jerry figures the only way he'll know Laura's true intentions is by trying to read her body language when she sees him. The problem is that men are terrible at reading women, but George claims to be an expert, so he gives Jerry a few pointers. However, Laura greets Jerry from behind with the classic peekaboo, something that George did not anticipate. Jerry then takes Laura to his apartment, and she makes herself at home and dims the lights while they drink some wine. I think we all know what's gonna happen next. Laura then asks Jerry if she can stay tomorrow night too, and they plan a fun date tomorrow. But then Laura's fiance calls, checking if she's okay, and Jerry is shocked to discover that she is engaged. Well, at least they can enjoy a fun day tomorrow on their 5-hour boat ride. That's awkward.
Men are not subtle. We are obvious. Women know what men want. Men know what men want. What do we want? We want women. That's it.
The stakeout premiered almost a year later and begins with Jerry and Elaine casually shopping at a video store. Man, I miss Blockbuster. Elaine can't figure out what to get because she's already seen every film there, so Jerry jokingly tells her to get a makes Elaine laugh, and she decides to get it as a gag birthday gift for her friend Pamela. She invites Jerry to come with, and Jerry only agrees to go if Elaine comes with him to a family wedding. At the birthday party, Jerry spends the entire time conversing with an attractive woman. Jerry tries to flirt with her more, but Jerry is with Elaine and the other woman is with some other guy, so it makes things awkward. She ends up leaving prematurely before Jerry can learn her name, but Jerry makes sure to remember the name of the law firm that she works for. On the way home, Elaine is angry at Jerry for making things awkward during that party. Jerry returns home to find his parents, Morty and Helen, chilling on Jerry's pull-out bed. They're in town for the wedding.
This is what I like, see? You come home, your parents are in your bed.
Jerry asks for advice on tracking down the woman from the party, while his parents judge him as picky for breaking up with Elaine. Jerry confesses he could ask Elaine for the woman's number, but doesn't think now is the best time to ask her about other women. Morty suggests that Jerry catch the woman at her office by staking out the lobby, and Jerry likes this creepy idea. George comes along with Jerry for the stakeout and decides they need a cover story for why Jerry is there. George decides to be an architect, that he and Jerry are here meeting a friend in the building named Art Vandelay, the famous importer-exporter. The mysterious woman comes down the elevator and somehow their ruse actually works as Jerry says hi. Jerry learns that her name is Vanessa and that she's single, and they continue chatting as George slips away. Elaine finds out Jerry tries to go out with one of her friends without asking, and it upsets her even more. Jerry argues he thought asking her would upset her even more, and Elaine explains that she was mad because she never saw Jerry flirt with anybody else before. They address the elephant in the room and agree that they need to talk openly with each other if they want to meet different people. Elaine is relieved by this, especially since she's already been seeing a Wall Street broker after doing a stakeout where he works. You just couldn't wait either, Elaine. The robbery begins with Jerry going over last-minute details with Elaine while she house-sits his place when he's on tour doing stand-up. George arrives to take Jerry to the airport, and all this talk about Jerry's apartment has made George offer to show him a better apartment near Central Park. See, Jerry's apartment isn't exactly up to code with all of its defects and problems, but Jerry doesn't really mind it. Elaine, on the other hand, wants Jerry to move out so that she can have his apartment since she frequently has problems with her roommate. This becomes another recurring gag throughout the show, as Elaine is constantly wanting a better living situation. Jerry can't think about any of this right now, so he leaves for his tour. When he comes back, he learns that his TV and VCR were stolen because Elaine was out. Kramer left the door wide open when he had to borrow a spatula.
I was gonna bring the spatula right back. Yeah, and? Well, I got caught up watching a soap opera. Bold and the Beautiful.
Since Jerry bought a secure lock instead of insurance, he's no theft coverage. Kramer vows to find the stolen goods, but Jerry expects nothing as he files a police report. This incident makes Jerry want to see the fancy apartments that George was talking about. Despite it being far more nice than Jerry needs, he decides to move in.
Look at this. I'm walking in it. It's a walk-in. Can you believe it? I'm nuts about this. What do you think?
However, Jerry starts getting cold feet later on, prompting George to offer to take the apartment instead. Elaine wants one of them to take it because she needs at least one of their old apartments to move into, so Jerry and George decide to flip a coin. Jerry wins, and George throws a tantrum. During this, Kramer suspects a neighbor from England was the thief and begins hassling the man without solid proof. Later, Jerry and George meet at Monk's Cafe, a popular meeting place for the group throughout the show, where George is still upset about losing the apartment. Jerry can't stand to see his friends sulk like this, so they both agree to back out of the apartment together. A waitress overhears their conversation and ends up getting the apartment instead, and later invites them and Elaine over for a housewarming party. All three mope as they learn of the many benefits that the new tenants have reaped from the apartment, and in their dejection, they overhear somebody else giving up his apartment. They all inquire at once. Here we go again. Male unbonding begins with George complaining about losing another love interest, and Jerry finding Kramer already in his apartment talking on the phone with one of Jerry's longtime friends, Joel Hornick. However, this is one of those friends that Jerry hates being around, but doesn't have the heart to tell him we should just stop seeing each other. It's a guy thing. The two of them meet at Monk's Cafe, and this time, Jerry finally works up the courage to tell Hornick that they should just stop being friends. Despite being a complete jerk, Hornick breaks down in tears when Jerry tells him this, and Jerry has to take back what he said because he can't stand making another man cry. To make Hornick feel better, he offers to take him to the upcoming Knicks game after already promising to take George to it. Now George is upset because he's lost his love interest and his great seat at a Knicks game in the same week. So Jerry decides to call Hornick and inform him that he can't go to the game with him, and soon realizes how easy it is to make an excuse in order to get out of spending time with Hornick.
Oh, hey, guys. Man, I'm telling you, this pizza idea is really gonna happen.
Elaine finds out about Jerry making excuses to get out of seeing him and can't believe that Jerry would do this to his friend. That is, until she meets Hornick and starts making excuses right alongside Jerry when Hornick tries to make plans to involve the three of them. By the way, during all of this, Kramer had an idea for a pizza restaurant where the customers make their own pizzas. I wonder if that will ever take off. Jumping ahead to season 2, Jerry's parents are back in the episode The Pony Remark, although Morty is played by a different actor from here on out. They're in town. because they're attending Helen's cousin Manya's 50th wedding anniversary. And Jerry's also invited. Jerry is hesitant to go, because his boisterous Uncle Leo will be there, and he hates Uncle Leo.
He's always grabbing my arm when he talks to me. I guess it's because so many people have left in the middle of his conversation.
Nevertheless, Jerry has to go, but at least he gets to take Elaine with him. During the dinner, Jerry's forced to sit next to his uncle and has to indulge in the horror of listening to his Parks and Recreation exploits.
Whenever he has a problem with one of these high-powered big shots from the Parks Department, you know who he calls?
Mickey Mantle?
He gets a break from this when Helen shifts the conversation to a relative marrying a racehorse owner, and Jerry ends up mocking kids that grew up owning ponies, not realizing Sweet Manya owned a pony as a kid. She proudly mentions that children having ponies in Poland are actually common, and indignantly leaves the table as Jerry tries to backpedal and explain his ignorance. The next day, Jerry gets a call from Leo, informing him that Manya is dead. No one can understand how she could die so suddenly, despite being in perfect health, until people start to wonder if Jerry's Pony Remark caused her death. Jerry tries to deny this, but things get worse when the funeral happens to be on the day of his softball championship game. Jerry is one of the best players on the team, so he can't attend the funeral. But at the same time, he feels obligated because Manya is family, and he may or may not have killed her. George reminds Jerry that the dead don't know who attends the funeral, but Jerry decides to go in the end because there's no knowing if the dead attend their funeral in spirit.
Its lustrous coat, its flowing mane. It was the pride of Krakow.
At the funeral, Jerry navigates between trying to offer his condolences and having to hear another riveting story from Uncle Leo. Manya's husband, Isaac, informs Jerry that Manya forgot all about Jerry's Pony Remark that night, so there's a good chance that Jerry didn't kill her. Ooh, that was close, I guess. Just then it starts raining, meaning the championship game will be postponed. Jerry feels a lot better about coming to the funeral instead of going to the game, but then when the game does happen, he does so horribly that it makes him believe Manya cursed him from the afterlife. In The Jacket, Elaine's father, Alton, is in town for an event regarding his new book, and he's invited Elaine and Jerry to act as social buffers. So Jerry and Elaine go shopping for new clothes for the event, which is hard for Jerry because he's not the kind of guy that knows what he wants. That is, until he finds a fancy suede jacket that he looks really good in. He decides to get it, despite it being pretty expensive, and it somehow radically bolsters Jerry's confidence to the point that he believes that he can actually do anything. Jerry arrives with George at the hotel Alton is staying at, wearing his new suede jacket. They arrived before Elaine, so they end up chatting with Alton in the meantime, which becomes incredibly awkward since Alton is humorless and very imposing. Jerry also reminds Alton of a buddy of his that was killed in Korea. Oh no. Elaine finally shows up to rescue them, saying that she was late because Kramer needed her to wait in his car while he dealt with some doves. It's better if you don't ask. As they leave for the restaurant, Elaine gets excited because it's snowing, but Jerry starts panicking because snow isn't very good for suede, so he decides to turn it inside out. Unfortunately, the other side is feminine pink and white striped, and Alton objects to walking down the street next to Jerry dressed like that. So Jerry has to walk 5 blocks in the snow and ends up ruining his new expensive jacket. The revenge begins with George bursting into his boss's office at his real estate job, going on a rant before announcing that he's quitting because he's not allowed to use the private executive bathroom anymore. He then finds Jerry doing laundry at Kramer's laundromat spot and boasts about how great it feels to quit his job. The guy's all fired up about quitting until Jerry asks him what he's going to do now, which George hadn't really thought about. He realizes he actually made a huge mistake in quitting, so Jerry suggests that he just go back to his job like nothing happened. It's not like everybody doesn't know how emotional of a guy George is. He's just blowing off a little steam, come on.
Sure, you're an emotional person. People don't take you seriously.
Monday morning, George walks into the staff meeting as if he never quit, but his boss, Rick, sees George and reveals that he actually did let him go after what happened. Rick then humiliates George even more by calling himself a winner and George a loser. Getting emotional again, George decides to drug his boss at an upcoming party and has Elaine distract Rick while he slips the drug into Rick's drink.
I'm going to a nudist colony next week.
However, as soon as George spikes his drink, Rick sees him and decides to hire him back. George is grateful, but then Rick decides to give a toast using the drink that George spiked. Feeling guilty, George tries to prevent his boss from getting drugged until Rick toasts everybody by reminding them how terrible George was at his job. To that, George tells Rick to drink up, and he still remains fired in the end. During all this, Kramer had been dealing with his friend Newman, trying to off himself by jumping from the top of their apartment building. Long story short, Newman doesn't go through with it, and he gets to stick around the show as a reoccurring character. This was the first episode that featured Newman, although we only hear him from a distance as he's voiced by Larry David. We don't see him in person until season 3 when he's played by Wayne Knight. Moving on to a bottle episode from the show, the Chinese restaurant is literally just Jerry, George, and Elaine waiting 20 minutes for the table to be ready. The more they wait, the hungrier they get. And they need to get a table now, otherwise they won't make the movie that they were planning on seeing after dinner. Each of them deals with their own unique problem. Elaine is the most hungry, George has to wait forever to use the public phone to call his date, and Jerry can't stop wondering if he knows a woman at another table.
Let's just eat popcorn or something.
Hot right?
I can't have popcorn for dinner.
Hot right?
We have to eat.
In the end, they get tired of waiting and decide to go somewhere else. But right after they leave, their table is called. In the episode, The Pen, Jerry and Elaine visit Morty and Helen's retirement community in Florida, where they will attend a ceremony honoring Morty as the outgoing condo association president. Jerry and Elaine also plan on going scuba diving, since they will be here for a few days. Shortly after they arrive, another resident named Jack Klompus and his wife Doris enter Jerry's parents' home to pay them back for a group dinner. Jack signs a check with an astronaut pen, and it catches Jerry's attention. When Jerry says that he likes it, Jack casually gives Jerry the pen to keep. This turns out to be a huge mistake, as everybody in the community knows that Jack loves that pen more than anything, so now everybody's going to make a big deal over something so little.
I know his wife. She has some mouth on her. She'll tell everyone in the condo now that you made him give you the pen. They're talking about it right now.
So you want me to return it?
Yes.
The next morning, Elaine wakes up with back pain because there were so few beds to sleep on, and Elaine had to sleep on the incredibly uncomfortable sofa bed. So this means that Jerry has to go scuba diving by himself, and he ends up hemorrhaging his eyes with the scuba mask. During all of this, Jerry taking Jack's pen has been all anybody's talking about in the community, to the point that it's becoming a very big scandal. So Jerry decides to just give the pen back. Ironically, this creates even more conflict because now Jack took back the pen he gave to Jerry. What is with these people? At the ceremony, Jack makes a big speech honoring Morty, where he jokingly insults Morty as he's still mad at him for getting mad at him for the pen, for getting mad at him for dinner, and for not paying the you-know-what. This is so convoluted at this point, but it is very funny. It's just kind of hard to watch. Basically, tensions rise and dentures are broken, and Jerry tries to relieve the situation with a comedy act. In the end, Jerry and Elaine are forced to stay at the retirement community for another 5 days, due to Elaine's bad back. But Jerry assures her that it will go by quickly. Of course, that's what he said when they were only going to be staying there for 3 days. Great. In the parking garage, the gang goes to the New Jersey shopping mall to buy cheap air conditioners, and of course, Kramer grabbed the last one. He carries this massive, heavy box through the parking garage looking for the car as the gang walks and talks behind him. But there's a problem. Kramer can't remember where he parked. This is bad because Elaine has to get her new goldfish home. George has to chaperone his parents for an upcoming wedding, and Jerry really has to pee.
I'm sure it's right around here.
Yeah, looks familiar. I remember the elevator.
There's elevators all over. Everything looks the same.
Kramer can't carry the air conditioner unit anymore, so he hides it behind a car while they look for their car. They keep looking, but everything looks the same, and they can't remember if they're on the right level or not. Keep in mind that this is before the days of the car locator apps. Eventually, Jerry gets so desperate to pee that Kramer convinces him to do it in a corner, unaware that a security guard was watching him the whole time. Jerry makes up outlandish excuses for his misdemeanor, claiming to suffer the fictional deadly disease of uromycetitis.
What I haven't told you, or anyone else for that matter, is that my father's been in a red Chinese prison for the past 14 years.
Back with the others, Elaine goes off on her own looking for the car, and George also ends up having to pee. So Kramer convinces him to go in the corner like Jerry did, and George immediately gets caught. So now, both George and Jerry are telling the same security guard the same excuse. Jerry and George are fined and allowed to leave, and they find Elaine. While they've been peeing, Elaine has been so desperate to save her fish that she's been asking people to drive her around the parking garage to find their car. She's had no luck, so George sees a pretty redhead walk by and asks her to help them out. Surprisingly, George's pitiful charm worked, and she agreed to help them.
I'm Michelle.
Hi, Michelle. I'm George.
However, she turned out to be a Scientologist, and George offended her religion, prompting her to throw them out of their car. Miraculously, she threw them out right in front of their car. Praise Xenu. The only problem is Kramer isn't with them. So they wait for Kramer, and he eventually arrives with the air conditioner that somehow wasn't stolen. Sadly, it was too late for George to chaperone his parents, and Elaine's fish found a new home in toilet water. To make things worse, Kramer's car won't start. Typical. In the cafe, Jerry has been obsessively surveying a new cafe near his apartment owned by a Pakistani proprietor, Babu Bhatt. The reason why he's so obsessed with it is because it's located in that one location where a new store is constantly changing hands. We all know these spots. Jerry knows Babu isn't going to last long, but he can't help but root for the guy to make it.
No, I'm obsessed with it. It's like a spider in the toilet struggling for survival.
Elaine convinces Jerry to eat at Babu's cafe, and Babu begins lavishing Jerry like he's a king of England. Babu's cafe turns out to be a weird fusion blend of every race and culture except Pakistani food. So Jerry suggests to Babu that he serve the food of his people. So Babu takes Jerry's advice and redesigns his cafe to be 100% Pakistani. Babu had to borrow more money for the remodel, and yet the restaurant is still empty. Jerry, who is egotistically oblivious to this, believes that he's the nicest person on the planet for helping Babu out. When Jerry makes a small comment about Babu's Pakistani food, Babu shakes his finger in Jerry's face and calls him a very, very bad man. In the end, Babu's restaurant closes for good, just like all the other restaurants and stores in that location. Babu then swears to get revenge on Jerry, somehow, some way. In The Nose Job, George has been down lately because he's been dating a girl with a very large nose named Audrey. Normally, a guy like George should be grateful that he even has a girl, but he just can't get over that very large schnoz. Apparently, he's not the only one who thinks that she needs a nose job.
It's amazing how many beautiful women live in New York. I actually find it kind of intimidating.
Well, you're as pretty as any of them. Just need a nose job.
Later that night, George and Audrey can't stop thinking about what Kramer said, and George impartially encourages her to get a nose job. After the operation, she's everybody gathered to watch her remove the bandages, and it looks worse than Michael Jackson's collapsed nose.
Over here.
Yeah.
You see this paranasal sinus cavity?
Oh, I got it.
See how it's collapsed? That's what's causing this huge dent.
Now, George can't look at Audrey even more than before, and what's worse, he has no remorse for convincing her to do this. When Audrey suggests that they take a trip together, George keeps making excuse after excuse to not go with her, and she ends up breaking up with him. Feeling bad for Audrey, Elaine calls upon Kramer to have his doctor repair Audrey's nose, and somehow manages to restore it to perfect proportion. Grateful for what he did, Audrey ends up dating Kramer, leaving George to feel like even more of a jerk. The subway begins with everyone leaving Monk's Cafe and using the subway before they all go their separate ways. George is dressed up for a job interview, Elaine is the best man at a lesbian wedding, Kramer must pay tickets for many traffic violations, and Jerry is taking a rare trip to Coney Island, where his stolen car was found and impounded. George's well-dressed appearance catches an attractive woman's attention, and he passes himself off as a successful stock trader to impress her.
Hey, what's another million, give or take? I get off where I want to get off.
He abandons his interview to go with her to a hotel room where she turns out to be a dominatrix and handcuffs him to the bed. She then robs him, taking his only suit to make up for his lack of cash, and George spends the rest of the day wrapped in a bedsheet from the hotel. Meanwhile, with Elaine, an old-fashioned woman judges her for her wedding duties, causing Elaine to loudly disavow lesbianism in self-defense. Later, the fully packed train stops without explanation, and Elaine suffers in silence while her inner monologue grows ever more frantic and the train loses power. Starts moving and then loses power again.
It's moving!
That's fun. Meanwhile, Jerry falls asleep on another passenger's shoulder and somehow wakes up all alone sitting across from an overweight man who has been stripped naked. Jerry scolds the naked man for his self-conceit, but they eventually bond while arguing the Mets' chances of winning the pennant. Jerry spends the day enjoying Coney Island with a man, but the impound lot closes before he can claim his car. After being beaten to open seats and a free newspaper by quicker passengers, Kramer overhears an inside tip that an underperforming racehorse is about to break his maiden. He rushes to an off-track betting parlor and wins a hefty payout on this horse. But then, a menacing stranger at the betting parlor follows Kramer back to the subway because because he's gonna rob him. Luckily, Kramer is saved when a blind violin busker reveals himself as an undercover policeman. Kramer surprises everybody by paying for dinner that evening at Monk's Cafe. Come on, I told you that Kramer was the nicest guy. The actor, not so much. Remember Newman? Well, it turns out he didn't off himself, and he's very much alive in his first on-screen appearance. A recurring gag on the show is how much Jerry hates Newman, and you're about to see why. The episode begins with Jerry taking out his garbage when he runs into his neighbor Martin's sexy girlfriend, Gina. Jerry tries to flirt with her, but Martin's superimposing presence makes him back off. I don't know, I'm starting to think Jerry's kind of a creep. That night, Gina comes knocking on Jerry's door, begging him to take them to the hospital because Martin might be dying. See, Gina had broken up with Martin, and he got so depressed that he tried to off himself by overdosing on pills. They rush him to the hospital, and Martin is placed in a coma. Gina explains that Martin was jealous of her talking to Jerry, and Gina confesses her feelings for Jerry and wants to make love on top of Martin's comatose body, which kinda puts Jerry off a little bit.
A man is lying here unconscious and you're afraid of him? What kind of a man are you?
Oh, a man who respects a good comb.
Later, Kramer comes by Jerry's place, complaining about Martin being in a coma because he still has his vacuum cleaner.
You know, I loaned it to him, he never returned it, the carpets are filthy. What am I gonna do?
Jerry then asks Kramer when a guy is allowed to date somebody whose ex is in a coma. Kramer informs him that there's no coma etiquette, and Jerry doesn't have to wait if he wants to date Gina. Of course, Kramer might just be saying this so he can have a legit excuse to get his vacuum back. So Jerry and Gina start seeing each other, but Jerry is still a little worried about what happens when Martin wakes up, and has some fears about being seen together in public. Naturally, as soon as they step outside Jerry's apartment, Kramer and Newman see them. This is bad, because Newman and Martin are very good friends, and Newman can't wait to tell Martin Jerry is dating his girl. Luckily, Jerry manages to bribe Newman into keeping his mouth shut by giving him a Drake's coffee cake. However, Elaine, who's been fasting for 3 days for an ulcer test, snatches the cake out of Newman's hands and eats it, right when Martin wakes up. So Newman tells Martin everything, and Martin starts strangling Jerry.
This bed, Martin, right in front of you.
I want my vacuum cleaner!
In The Fix-Up, George is once again complaining to Jerry about how difficult it is for him to find a girl. Coincidentally, Elaine has a friend named Cynthia who's in the same dilemma, so Jerry and Elaine decide to fix them up together.
You know what your problem is? Your standards are too high.
I went out with you.
George is against the idea at first, but then Jerry wins George over with how amazing of a person Cynthia is. Elaine, on the other hand, has a bit more trouble trying to persuade Cynthia to go out with George because, well, he's not exactly Ryan Reynolds here. So George and Cynthia plan a date over the phone, and the conversation goes surprisingly well. As George celebrates getting a date with a girl, Kramer walks in with a bag full of condoms from a friend of his at a condom factory. He hands them out to the gang like candy, but only George takes one, just in case he might need it later that night. The date goes well, and George and Cynthia end up doing the dirty in the kitchen, because according to George, it's the most social place in the house. A few days go by, and George gets very anxious when she doesn't call or talk to him ever since their date. Jerry gets really into this and decides to call her, but George tries to stop him, resulting in both of them fighting over the phone, right as Kramer enters. Kramer breaks them up and makes them apologize, assuming that they're fighting over something else. And then Kramer drops the bomb: the condoms he gave them were defective.
Defective? How could you give me a
Cynthia then informs Elaine that she missed her period, and Elaine blames Jerry for starting this whole mess. Jerry instead blames Elaine for everything, and the two of them get into a fight. Kramer once again enters at that moment and breaks them up, once again assuming that the fight is about something else.
Don't you two see that you're in love with each other?
Kramer then gives Jerry a condom that isn't defective so that he can give it to George later, prompting Elaine to reveal that Cynthia is pregnant as George enters the apartment. Ironically, George is happy to know that he's the father and his boys are swimming. He tells Cynthia that no matter her decision to keep the baby or not, he will always be there for her. But it turns out it was a false alarm, as Cynthia's had her period shortly after, but she was so touched by his willingness to support her that she decided to keep dating him. She, however, has second thoughts when she sees how disgustingly he eats. Wow. So close. Moving on to the show's first two-parter, The Boyfriend. Jerry, George, and Kramer are in a YMCA locker room when Jerry spots real-life baseball player Keith Hernandez. Jerry wonders if he should go say hi to him because he's such a big fan. But George argues that he shouldn't because big-time baseball players don't have time for comedians.
Excuse me. I don't want to disturb you. I'm Keith Hernandez, and I just want to tell you what a big fan I am. I love your comedy.
George stands corrected. Jerry and Keith start bonding, and Keith gives Jerry his number when Jerry invites him to come watch his next show. However, Keith takes forever to call back, and Jerry anxiously decides to meet him in person. Kramer and Newman overhear Jerry's plans to meet Keith and recount the time that Keith spit on them when Newman insulted him after Keith cost them the game against the Phillies. Jerry, knowing the story well, conducts a mock courtroom reconstruction of the scene with a flashback parodying the magic bullet that killed JFK and proposes a second spitter hidden in the bushes. Oh my god.
That is one magic loogie.
Jerry and Keith end up hanging out that night, and they make plans to see each other again. During this, they had given Elaine a ride downtown, and before Jerry leaves, Keith asks if Elaine is single. He asks Jerry if he minds him asking Elaine to go on a date with him, knowing that she and Jerry used to date, and Jerry ambiguously says that he doesn't mind. Things get kind of awkward when Keith makes plans with Elaine the exact same day he and Jerry had planned to hang out, so he moves his hangout day with Jerry to next week. Jerry tells Elaine that he doesn't mind, but Elaine points out Jerry's more jealous of Keith than her. Ooh, that's awkward. Elaine's date with Keith goes well, and he drops her off at home and passionately kisses her.
Who does this guy think he is?
I'm Keith Hernandez.
As Elaine loves how their relationship is going, Jerry gets a call from Keith the next day, asking Jerry to help him move his furniture. Jerry feels his relationship with Keith is moving too fast, because moving another guy's furniture is the equivalent of making it to third base. Oh my god. Elaine and Keith go out for another date, and despite their great chemistry, Elaine ends up dumping him when she finds out that Keith is a smoker. Jerry also decides that his relationship with Keith isn't working out when he gets cold feet on a moving day. At that exact moment, Kramer and Newman enter and see Keith, and these two are fuming mad at him for spitting on them. Keith then explains that it wasn't him who spitted on them, but Phillies player Roger McDowell, who was over by the bushes, just like Jerry deduced.
Well, maybe because we were sitting in the right field stands, cursing at him in the bullpen all game.
Kramer and Newman apologize to Keith and offer to help him move instead of Jerry. Elaine then calls Jerry, and the two of them reflect on their complicated relationships with the great Keith Hernandez. In the limo, George is picking Jerry up from the airport when George's car breaks down. With no way of getting home, Jerry sees a limo driver waiting for a man named Donald O'Brien to arrive. So George gets the genius idea to pass himself off as O'Brien, and it surprisingly works. The driver then starts driving them to Madison Square Garden and needs 4 tickets for the next Bulls game. Jerry and George have died and gone to heaven. They decide to invite Elaine and Kramer to have the other 2 tickets. When they arrive to pick them up, they end up picking up the other 2 members, Tim and Eva, in O'Brien's party. Jerry and George start panicking, thinking that they're going to be recognized as imposters, but it turns out O'Brien doesn't ever show his face, so they really believe that George is O'Brien. Meanwhile, Elaine and Kramer are waiting for Jerry and George to arrive, and Kramer educates Elaine on Michael Jordan while they wait. Back in the limo, George learns that O'Brien is supposed to make a speech at the game and realizes that O'Brien and these two belong to a bunch of white supremacist Holocaust deniers. Oh no. The limo then harmlessly blows a tire, and the spooked followers react militantly, revealing a collection of military handguns in the limo. Eva ends up declaring her loyal devotion to George, arousing him.
I'm ready to die for you.
Eventually, they pick up Elaine and Kramer and narrowly avoid a group of protesters mistaking George for O'Brien. They all cram into the limo, but as they drive away, the real O'Brien calls the limo, exposing them. The limo still drives to Madison Square Garden, where a massive group of protesters are gathered outside and start rocking the limo. George is taken out and tries his best to explain to the rioting crowd that he's not a terrorist. So we all know how Kramer likes to barge into Jerry's place unannounced and sometimes borrow things. Well, it got to a point where Jerry just gave Kramer a set of keys to his apartment. But later, Kramer has been abusing his privilege, such as borrowing things in the middle of the night, taking a bath unannounced, and being with a woman just as Jerry returns with his flirtatious date. Jerry finally has enough and takes away Kramer's spare keys.
Give me those keys.
No.
Let go.
You let go. Come on.
Stop it now. Come on, Kramer.
Jerry then gives his spare keys to Elaine, but they both take pity on Kramer and offer the keys back. Kramer refuses this pity, blaming himself for breaking the covenant of keys. He takes back his own ring of numerous spare keys to trade with George and declares that he's leaving for California to pursue an acting career.
Do you ever yearn?
Yearn? Do I yearn?
I yearn.
You yearn?
Oh, yes. Yes, I yearn.
George and Elaine agree to give back each other's keys so that George can trade with Kramer and Elaine can trade with Jerry. En route to California, Kramer's car breaks down and he has to make his way to California via hitchhiking. Meanwhile, Jerry gets locked out of his apartment, so he has George lend him Elaine's spare key so that he can get a spare key from her apartment. They search Elaine's apartment and instead find her secret spec script for the show Murphy Brown.
Elaine is writing a sitcom?
Elaine catches them, everybody blames each other and demands their keys back. But by now, they have lost track of which keys are whose. Later, Jerry and Elaine are watching Murphy Brown when they see Kramer on the show playing a minor role. Lucky son of a... Season 4 picks up right where we left off in the two-part episode, The Trip. George can't believe that Kramer is on Murphy Brown, but both he and Jerry feel guilty about pushing Kramer away when they took away his keys. Coincidentally, Jerry's been invited to do a set on The Tonight Show in LA and was given 2 tickets. So he invites George to go with him so that they can see Kramer, unaware that Kramer has been blacklisted as an actor ever since he appeared on Murphy Brown. Shopping around his own spec script, The Keys, Kramer hands a copy to Chelsea, a fellow auditionee, and pushes another copy on child actor Fred Savage, who slips away from him. Chelsea is later found murdered by an unidentified serial killer, and a hard-boiled police detective finds Kramer's script on her. Jerry and George land in LA and arrive at NBC Studios, and George meets famous actors like Corbin Burnson and George Wendt, who later make fun of him when they go on The Tonight Show. Jerry has a hard time with his set because he'd written down several great jokes the night before, but the cleaning lady accidentally threw them out and he couldn't remember them. The episode ends with Jerry and George seeing a new report for the police manhunt for Kramer, mistaken as the serial killer. Part 2 begins right where we left off, with Jerry and George trying to make sense of Kramer being a serial killer. They call 911 so they can try and clear Kramer's name, but Jerry's too afraid to give his name, so he gives George's. A cop car comes by to pick them up, but they end up sharing the back seat with a carjacker.
What do you tip a Chamberlain? I don't know. $5 a night. No. $1. 2 tops.
The cops then get a message from the dispatcher regarding Kramer's location, so they pursue, inadvertently allowing the carjacker to escape.
Jerry! George! You're under arrest for first-degree murder. The death of Miss Chelsea Lane.
Kramer is arrested, and at first seems carefree and content with being arrested. But he quickly cracks and is dragged away screaming. He's then interrogated, and his protests are silenced by the detective, who zealously profiles his psychology and motives. Kramer is reduced to a blubbering mess by the relentless accusations, but another victim is found while he's detained, proving that Kramer is innocent. He celebrates, cheering, "The murderer struck again," with Jerry and George. Overlooking the San Fernando Valley, Kramer reflects on the struggle of making it in Hollywood, and declines to return with Jerry and George. Jerry apologizes for their fallout, and everybody hugs. Jerry and George go home without Kramer, but then it turns out Kramer came home after all, and goes about acting as if his adventure in LA never happened. Jerry welcomes him back by giving back the spare key. Aw. Later, we find out that the carjacker was the serial killer all along, and Jerry and George accidentally let him escape. Whoops. Moving on to another two-parter, The Pitch. Jerry just performed at a comedy club when an NBC executive, Stu Shermack, invites him to pitch a TV show starring himself. Sounds pretty meta, doesn't it? Jerry loves the idea, and he accepts, then has to listen to George and Kramer pitching him terrible ideas for a TV show.
And you're the manager of the circus. The circus? Oh, come on, this is a great idea.
While at Monk's Cafe, Jerry and George end up confusing seltzer and salsa in a funny Mexican accent, and this gives George the idea for Jerry's show. A bunch of random, everyday conversations between Jerry and his friends, with no story. Sound familiar?
Just talking? What's the show about?
It's about nothing.
George pitches the exact same premise of Seinfeld, and even volunteers to be a writer on the show. Jerry eventually loves the idea, and pitches the idea to Kramer, who only likes the idea if he plays himself in the show. As they anxiously await to pitch their idea to the executives, they run into another writer known as Crazy Joe Davola. Joe is a mentally unstable patient of Dr. Reston, a psychiatrist that Elaine has been seeing lately. And right now he's very mentally unstable because Reston forgot to give him his next prescription.
What are you doing?
Dropped the script off.
Oh, good for you.
During which, Jerry casually drops that Kramer didn't invite Joe to his party, and it upsets Joe because he and Kramer are supposed to be good friends. Jerry and George confidently pitch the idea for their show about nothing, and the executives have a hard time understanding it, especially the head executive, Russell. Jerry tries to explain the genius of it, but George keeps interrupting Jerry and gets carried away in defending his artistic integrity, and he storms out. Later, Jerry chews George out for being a complete idiot during the pitch, but George is more concerned about having a chance at a romantic relationship with one of the executives, Susan Ross. Jerry then calls Kramer to warn him about Joe, and somehow George ends up dating Susan. He brings Susan up to Jerry's apartment to show her off, but Kramer ends up puking all over her when he drinks expired milk. Wow. George is embarrassed and gets scared that this incident destroyed their chances at getting their show made. But Jerry is still optimistic. During this, Joe kicked Kramer in the head for not inviting him, but luckily Kramer was wearing the helmet Newman gave him, so he survived unharmed. Minus some possible brain damage, but some brain damage was already there. Susan gives George the dry cleaning bill for when Kramer vomited on her, and all three men decide to split it 3 ways as they all feel they were responsible for what happened. Still certain that Kramer ruined their chances, they get a phone call from NBC wanting another meeting with them. As they wait for the cab, they just so happen to run into good old Uncle Leo. Sadly, they can't stay and chit-chat with him because of their appointment, so they have to leave him on the street all alone. Not at all insulting the poor guy. During this, Jerry had thrown away his watch as it was a few minutes slow, and as Leo left, he found the watch in the public trash can and decides to keep it. At the second meeting, Jerry and George are pressured by the executives to backpedal on the no story concept of the show, but thanks to Susan, they're able to secure a pilot order. I guess she forgave George for the vomit. Afterwards, Jerry gets a phone call from Helen wondering why Jerry was so rude to Leo. Jerry tries to explain that he wasn't, that he had to get to a meeting. But something tells me this conflict is just getting started. Continuing the story, in The Wallet, Morty and Helen are in town to see a doctor for Morty's back pain because it turns out he also slept on that uncomfortable sofa bed. By now, they've already heard that Jerry and George are writing a pilot for NBC, and Jerry assures his parents that he and George are accepting the offer, unaware that George is currently with Susan, rejecting the offer as a bluff. George is doing this because he's trying to get a bigger salary, and because he doesn't understand the politics of the entertainment business. In other words, he's stupid. Morty and Helen also notice that Jerry's watch is missing, but unable to admit that he threw away their gift, Jerry pretends that the watch is out for repair all week. While his parents are at the clinic, Jerry finds out George passed on the offer, and tries to explain to an overconfident George how stupid of a decision that was.
They go with maybe 5, okay? If we pass, that's it. They go to the next show. Ooh, I'm scared.
During this, George gives Kramer a box of Cuban cigars that Susan gave him from her father, as he didn't know what to do with them. Jerry then gets a package from Federal Express, and it turns out to be Elaine back from her time with Reston and just playing a joke. Everyone is happy to see her back, but the happiness wears off when Elaine reveals that things are not going great with her and Reston. At the clinic, Morty gets into a hospital gown and has some x-rays taken. He leaves the room where all his clothes were, and when he comes back, his wallet is gone. Morty accuses the doctors of stealing it, but there's no evidence to support the accusation. Meanwhile, Elaine tries to break up with Reston, but it's impossible to lie to him, and Elaine ends up explaining that she's in another relationship with Kramer? What? Jerry and his parents go out to dinner, where Morty still thinks the doctors stole his wallet. Leo enters the restaurant and is mad at Morty for accusing the doctors because they're good friends of his. Helen then recognizes Jerry's watch on his wrist and recounts how he found it in the trash can and then later he had it repaired. Realizing that this is his watch, Jerry tries to distract everybody, but it's no use. As expected, we learn in the next episode, The Watch, that the NBC executives decided to pass on Jerry and George's show about nothing idea.
You know, somehow, I told you so just doesn't quite say it.
Susan scolds George for not taking the offer, and George panics and says the whole idea was Jerry's. George then begs Susan to give him Russell's address, but she refuses. So George tries to wrestle the address out of Susan's purse. Meanwhile, Elaine explains to Kramer that he has to pose as her boyfriend in order to impress Reston. Kramer goes along with this, and plays his role beautifully when he calls Reston to confirm Elaine's relationship status. However, Reston is a master manipulator and persuades Kramer to meet with him in person, like he hypnotized him over the phone or something. Back at the restaurant, Jerry manages to defuse the situation with the watch, but then gets into an argument with his dad when it comes time to pay the check. Despite having no wallet, Morty is persistent to pay it, and Jerry gives up trying to talk sense into the guy. He leaves and corners Leo in the bathroom, trying to buy back the watch from him, but Morty catches them. During this, George tracks down Russell and barges in on him while he's having a quiet dinner with a woman. George pitifully pleads with Russell to give him another chance, and when Russell's dinner guest gets bored, Russell allows Jerry and George another chance for less than what they were going to be paid. While Kramer is beguiled into gladly supporting Reston and Elaine together, Elaine encounters Joe, knowing nothing about him, and they hit it off. She gives Joe her number, and he consults Reston after Kramer gushing over his newfound love for Elaine. The next day, Jerry apologizes for lying about the watch, and his parents accept it. George arrives and informs them the good news that he got back the deal with NBC, but everybody gets angry at him when they find out he held out for less money. Leo then arrives to take his parents to the airport, but before they go, Jerry gives his dad with a new wallet. Aww. However, the wallet has Velcro, and Morty has a thing about Velcro, so he throws the wallet away. Unaware, Jerry also put in the wallet $400. And of course, Leo finds the wallet in the trash can, and he keeps it. Jerry recently started dating a waitress named Naomi, and in the episode Bubble Boy, we see he's starting to regret dating her because he has a laugh that sounds like Elmer Fudd. When they come back from a date, Jerry listens to his answering machine, and there's a message from George asking about how his date with Naomi went. And George mentions how much Jerry hates her laugh. Naomi hears this and storms out. The next day, Jerry's furious at George for leaving the message, but George argues it wasn't his fault. Before this, Susan had invited the gang to spend the weekend at her family's cabin, but Jerry points out that Naomi being mad at him means she most likely won't be coming with. George suggests inviting Elaine instead, but then that means they have to invite Kramer, and Susan is still upset at him for vomiting. Somehow, they convince Kramer to stay behind, and Elaine decides to come with. During this, Jerry's approached by a truck driver named Mel, who tells Jerry that his son Donald is a huge fan. Donald lives in a bubble because he suffers from severe combined immunodeficiency, and Mel wants Jerry to come entertain his son. Mel's house happens to be near the cabin, so Jerry agrees. As they drive to the cabin, Jerry and Elaine follow George and Susan, but Jerry loses track of Speed Racer George and doesn't know the way. George and Susan reach the house first, while Jerry and Elaine hang out at a diner trying to figure out where they are. George and Susan end up being Donald's entertainment in the meantime and play Trivial Pursuit with him. Donald kicks George's butt, and George is a sore loser, so he ends up fighting Donald and accidentally punches a hole in the bubble. Jerry and Elaine finally made it to the house just as Donald is being carried away to the hospital, and George blames Donald for trying to kill him. During all of this, Naomi left a message on Jerry's answering machine saying she wanted to go to the cabin after all. And Kramer heard this message. So the two of them ended up going to the cabin together, and they decided to go night swimming as soon as they get there. However, Kramer brought these Cuban cigars with him and accidentally left one still smoking in the cabin, so the whole place went up in flames. Kramer. The Cheever Letters opens with Jerry and George returning from the weekend trying to figure out what to do about the burned down cabin. However, they can't worry about this right now because they have a pilot to write. But instead, they do what every writer does whenever they have a deadline, and that is welcome every distraction that comes their way. After a day of accomplishing absolutely nothing on the script, George meets Susan's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ross. Mr. Ross reminisces over the cabin's long history as a treasured family legacy, and that's when George and Susan break the news of the fire. Mr. Ross then retires from the table in shock, while Susan's mother, drunk, laughs it off. The next day, Jerry and George meet with Susan when a delivery man delivers the one thing that survived the fire, a trove of letters that turn out to be vulgar love letters to her father from novelist John Cheever. The family's dumbfounded, as Susan's father unabashedly defends his gay love affair with the late Cheever.
Well, we really should be heading out. It's a time.
Wow, I guess that's why he loved the cabin so much. Remember Crazy Joe? Well, the episode The Opera begins with Joe threatening Jerry in a voicemail, believing Jerry was responsible for losing his deal with NBC. Meanwhile, Jerry and his friends make plans to see the great Luciano Pavarotti in Pagliacci, which is an opera about a clown that murders his unfaithful wife Netta and her lover. Sounds complicated. Elaine plans on bringing Joe along, and Jerry can't wait to meet him, unaware that he's mentally unstable.
He's happy, he's well-adjusted.
He eventually finds this out when he finally hears Joe's voicemail. While Jerry tries to de-escalate the situation, Elaine arrives unannounced at Joe's house and is shocked to find his creepy shrine dedicated to her. Finally, realizing that Joe is indeed crazy, she tries to leave. But Joe stops her, referring to Elaine as the unfaithful Netta from the opera. He suspects Elaine doesn't want to be with him because she's with Jerry, and continues to threaten her until Elaine escapes with mace spray. Everyone makes it to the opera, and Elaine arrives with Jerry. George had also planned to come with Susan, but she wasn't able to come. So now they have 2 extra tickets. Kramer decides to scalp them to anybody that couldn't get a ticket, and meets a clown more terrifying than Pennywise. Joe seriously lost his marbles and decides to dress as the clown from the opera, and Kramer so that he can exact sweet revenge on Jerry. Joe finds Jerry, so he and Elaine force their way inside the theater, hoping to lose Joe inside because he doesn't have a ticket. Unfortunately, Kramer didn't know who Joe was, and sold his ticket to the clown. Uh-oh. The next episode, The Virgin, begins a month and a half after the events of the last episode, and Jerry and George still haven't come up with a pilot. At a bar, Jerry spots Marla, a professional organizer that he almost dated, who's now single because her boyfriend never returned from the fall of the Berlin Wall celebrations. George impresses Marla's friend Stacy by boasting about writing for NBC, and Jerry warns George that Susan is officially his girlfriend. But George is tempted to leave Susan so that he can take advantage of having an impressive job to meet women. Jerry reminds him that if he loses Susan, then there goes their offer at NBC. George fantasizes that he could get out scot-free by hooking up Susan with David Letterman, who she's in love with. Meanwhile, Jerry and Marla start hanging out, and Marla explains the real reason her boyfriend left was because she was still a virgin. Elaine then happens to walk in and casually talks about the benefits of her birth control in front of Marla, who awkwardly leaves.
She's a virgin. She just told me.
Oh, I didn't know.
Well, it's not like spotting a toupee.
Upon learning that Marla's a virgin, Elaine educates Marla about how wonderful intercourse can be, starting with the expectation that men will make excuses to leave right after doing the deed. In the meantime, Jerry and George finally put together something of a story for their pilot. Nah, I'm just kidding. They still have nothing, but they did order some Chinese food for Kramer.
Hey, we're ordering Chinese food. If you want anything, let me know what it is, and I'll order it for you.
The best Jerry can pitch to the NBC executives is a story about him and his friends waiting to be seated at a Chinese restaurant. Sound familiar? The idea gets rejected. So Jerry pitches one of George's terrible ideas, and ironically, it is very well received. George enters the meeting late, because he thought he saw David Letterman and casually shakes everybody's hands before casually kissing Susan on the lips in front of everybody. Whoops. Susan ends up getting fired, and berates George for his indiscretion, but George is secretly ecstatic because the NBC deal no longer hinges on their relationship. This is a terrible person. Thankfully, George has a friend like Jerry to remind him that he's an obligation to support Susan first, especially after ruining her life.
Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in.
Later that night, Jerry tries to go all the way with Marla, but Elaine's advice kills the mood. She goes home. In the end, Susan does dump George, freeing him to date other women, but they all look down on him because he's a sitcom writer. Ah, sweet, sweet karma.
Who'd have figured Susan would break up with him? They had a good thing going.
Yeah. Since she met him, she's been vomited on. Her family cabin's been burned down. She learned her father's a homosexual, and she got fired from a high-paying network job. Yeah, they had a real good thing going.
Moving on to probably the greatest episode in the show, The Contest, everyone is meeting at Monk's Cafe when George walks in looking more glum than usual. Apparently, he was pleasuring himself, and his mother Estelle caught him in the act, and nothing is more humiliating than getting caught by your parents. What's worse is Estelle hurt her back when she saw him, so now she's in the hospital for a few days.
She's got to be there for a couple of days. All she said on the way over in the car was, "Why, George, why?"
George then vows he will never do that again, but no one believes that he can commit to it. One thing leads to another, and they all make a wager to see who can last the longest without, Obviously, there's no way to monitor each other's resilience, so they agree to adhere to the honor system. The next day, Kramer informs Jerry and George of a naked woman in an apartment across the street, and Kramer can't help but take advantage of the opportunity. Elaine is the next to go, and she takes an aerobics class, and John F. Kennedy Jr. happens to be in this same class. Elaine has a weird obsession with him, so naturally she gives into her fantasies and imagines herself doing certain things to him. That leaves Jerry and George as the only masters of their domain, but their lives have been a stressful, sleepless nightmare ever since they took the bet. To make things worse, they're constantly tempted wherever they go. The woman is still naked outside Jerry's apartment, and George gets to watch a sexy nurse give a sexy woman a sponge bath every time he visits his mother in the hospital. Things are especially difficult for Jerry because he's still seeing Marla, and she finally wants to go all the way. But when he mentions that he and his friends have been partaking in a contest, she storms out and ends up losing her virginity to JFK Jr. In the end, George wins the contest, but in a way, Kramer won because he got the naked woman across the street. Man, this show is really for the boys, huh? In the episode The Shoes, Jerry and George have finally got a groove going writing their pilot, and by now, they've introduced characters such as themselves, Kramer, and Jerry's butler. They then realize they never did a scene with Elaine's character, so they quickly try to squeeze her into a scene, but like all men, they have no idea how to write her woman character. So they decide to scrap Elaine's character and finally finish the script. At Monk's Cafe, Elaine is furious to find out her character was scrapped, but Jerry explains it was because there were too many characters to keep track of. During this, Kramer had snubbed an ex-girlfriend of Jerry's, Gail Cunningham, and Gail finds Jerry at the cafe, thinking that Jerry had something to do with the snubbing. Snubbing is a tactic that Jerry invented where he believes if he ignores women, then they will want more. Jerry denies he had any involvement in the snubbing, and then Gail comments on Elaine's nice shoes. Gail puts Elaine on the spot to confess that the shoes are from Botticelli's, a shop which Gail claims to be beyond her own means. Elaine is insulted by Gail's backhanded compliment, while Jerry is oblivious. Later, Kramer announces to everybody that he and Gail kissed, and Kramer is convinced it was because he snubbed her. Jerry, George, and Kramer then get into a heated debate over whether snubbing actually works.
Yes, I understand women. The snub is good. They love the snub.
Kramer then asks a now sick Elaine about her shoes, and Elaine gets so furious that Gail is telling everybody about her shoes that she confronts Gail at work. Gail is in the middle of the dinner rush at Pfeiffer's, the restaurant that she works at, and doesn't have time for Elaine, and doesn't notice Elaine accidentally sneezing on a pasta dish going out. Coincidentally, the pasta dish happens to be for Russell from NBC, and he gets a nasty stomach flu. Jerry and George then meet with Russell at his home regarding the script, but every time he's about to give some feedback, he has to run to the toilet and throw up.
You think he liked it?
I'm not sure.
Russell's daughter from another marriage walks in, and Russell catches George after Jerry nudged him, staring at her cleavage. They later find out that Russell decided to cancel their pilot, and I wonder why. As Jerry and George try to rationalize the male gaze, they get the idea to find Russell at Pfeiffer's and try to convince him to give them another chance. They get Gail's cooperation, but only if she gets to have Elaine's shoes. They then try to get Elaine to seduce Russell with a low-cut dress, in exchange for giving her a part in the script. In the end, Russell revives their pilot, and Elaine gets a date with Russell. Jerry's birthday is fast approaching in the episode The Outing, and George tells Elaine at Monk's Cafe that he got him 2 tickets to see Guys and Dolls. Jerry is also here waiting to be interviewed by a journalism grad student from NYU, and while he waits, Elaine notices a girl named Sharon behind Jerry and George eavesdropping on their conversation. Elaine then pranks her by making Jerry and George come out of the closet, and they both go along with it for a moment before the whole idea weirds Jerry out. Little did she know that Sharon is the grad student waiting to interview Jerry, but didn't know what he looked like. Jerry then calls her to do the interview at his apartment while George is there, and the whole time she thinks Jerry and George are a gay couple. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Jerry realizes the misconception and tries to convince her that they aren't gay, not that there's anything wrong with that, and despite their best efforts, Sharon ends up publishing the story, and the whole world knows that they are out before they were ever in.
I thought we were friends.
They then have to explain everything to their parents, but no matter how hard they try, they can't convince their parents they aren't gay, not that there's anything wrong with that. Later, George realizes that this is a blessing sent from the gods above. See, he had been trying to break up with this girl named Allison, but has been unable because she gets depressed every time he does. So he shows her the article in the paper that claims that he's gay, but she won't believe it until Jerry confirms it. They then find Jerry and Sharon exchanging saliva in his apartment, and George tries to pretend like Jerry was cheating on him, but it doesn't work. So George tries to convince her he's a actor named Buck Naked, but all it does is turn her on even more. Not that there's anything wrong with that. In The Implant, Jerry runs into his date, Cedra, at their health club, and they make plans for another date. Elaine is also there, and at first glance, Elaine is certain that Cedra has breast implants. Jerry doesn't believe this, and forces Elaine to go into the girl's sauna and verify if they're real or not. After a thorough, closer look, Elaine confirms that they are fake. This causes Jerry to break up with her, but he doesn't tell Cedra it's because of her fake breasts. However, a few days later, Elaine sees Cedra in the sauna again, and the two of them become friendly as they talk about how lousy Jerry is. Elaine then introduces herself, but then stumbles as she comes forward to shake Cedra's hand, and Elaine's hand lands right on top of Cedra's exposed breast. Elaine then reports back to Jerry about what happened, but this time, she says they're real. Jerry doesn't know if Elaine is telling the truth or not, but he still feels terrible about dumping her. Meanwhile, George accompanies his girlfriend Betsy to a wake for her dead aunt, but mostly spends his time over at the snack table. He ends up double dipping a chip and is caught by Betsy's younger brother Timmy. They both get into a heated argument over who or what double dipped, and they start fighting, causing Betsy to throw George out. Upon finding out that they were real, Jerry tries to get back with Cedra, and discreetly tries to coax her into revealing if her breasts are in fact real or not. Kramer then enters, wanting to borrow Jerry's bathing suit for his trip to Puerto Rico, and Elaine just so happens to be with him. Cedra sees Elaine and puts 2 and 2 together, realizing Jerry sent Elaine into the sauna to determine if they're real or not. She leaves, but not before confirming that they are real and they are spectacular. In The Junior Mint, Elaine needs to visit her ex-boyfriend Roy, a starving artist who has been hospitalized for a splenectomy. Having left Roy because he's fat, Elaine has Jerry pretend to be her boyfriend, only to find Roy now slim and fit after starving himself out of heartbreak. Elaine ditches Jerry and invites Roy to a big dinner. Kramer also tags along, hoping to steal some hospital gloves for a project in his apartment. And he questions Roy's doctor about a 2020 report on an unsafe retractor. Thinking he's concerned about Roy, the doctor invites everybody to watch Roy's surgery from the operating theater gallery.
Saw through bone. We'll see what's inside bone.
During the operation, Kramer eats a box of Junior Mints while he and Jerry watch. He offers one to Jerry, but Jerry doesn't want it. And when Kramer insists, Jerry accidentally knocks the mint out of Kramer's hand, landing right into Roy's exposed abdominal cavity. No one notices what happened, and the doctors are baffled when Roy's post-surgery prognosis comes back looking grim. Kramer forbids Jerry from confessing their guilt, while George, speculating on Roy's death, spends $1,900 on Roy's paintings of triangles.
Didn't they notice it?
No!
How could they not notice it?
Because it's a little mint. It's a junior mint.
However, Jerry's guilt gets the better of him, and he calls the hospital to confess, only to learn that Roy is actually going to be okay. Turns out, George buying his art encouraged him to get better, and George fakes a smile knowing that he just blew $1,900 despite saving the man's life. Roy then asks Elaine where they're going out to dinner when he's recovered, but after seeing Roy's disgusting eating, Elaine changes her mind. In The Smelly Car, George is returning an erotic film at a video rental shop when he sees a lesbian couple behind him. He recognizes one of the women as Susan and tries to hide his face, but Susan recognizes him. They engage in an awkward post-breakup conversation, and George learns that Susan started going out with her partner Mona right after she broke up with George. Ooh, that's awkward. During this awkward conversation, no one notices Mona watching Kramer practice his golf swing with a broom. Kramer and Mona end up spending time together romantically, and Susan is pissed that Kramer's ruined her life once more.
This woman has never been with a man her entire life.
I'm Kramer.
Susan finds sympathy in George as she now understands how difficult women can be. But really, George still wants to be with Susan because her being a lesbian has made him more attracted to her. While they're at Monk's Cafe, George's ex-girlfriend Allison returns and ironically falls in love with Susan. So now that's two people who have dated George and then realize that they're lesbians. The Handicap Spot begins with everyone going to the mall to find an engagement gift for a friend of theirs. They can't find any parking, except for that one empty handicap spot that no one takes. Kramer pressures George to park there, rationalizing that handicapped people want to be treated equally like everyone else. So George parks in the handicap spot. When they return from shopping, they find an ambulance and an angry crowd of people around their car. Turns out that because they took the handicap spot, a wheelchair-bound woman named Lola had an accident detouring on a ramp and was hospitalized.
I get to you, coward! How are we gonna get out of here? They'll kill us.
The angry crowd wants vengeance, so everyone pretends that the car isn't theirs, which is actually true because the car is George's father's car. They leave and come back with an idea for a distraction, but by then, the car has been completely totaled. When George's dad Frank finds out, he can't believe his son would be so stupid. What's worse is Frank doesn't have insurance, so George tries to explain that he was attacked by racist motorcyclists. During this, Kramer goes to see Lola in the hospital and immediately falls in love with her. He ropes George into getting a new wheelchair for her, but they unknowingly buy a cheap one with defective brakes. Whoops. Frank ends up getting arrested because it was his car in the handicap spot, and George is able to get Frank bailed if he becomes his butler. Sound familiar? Season 4 ends with the two-parter episode, The Pilot. And by now, Jerry and George's pilot has been finished. George won't stop being anxious because casting was supposed to be taking place this week. They haven't heard anything. But Jerry's more worried about trying to convince Kramer to not play himself in the pilot. Part of why Russell might not have been calling them is because he was too busy calling Elaine trying to get back together with her. In a restaurant, Russell pours out his heart to her, despite her desperate attempts to end things with him. Thankfully, NBC calls Jerry and announces casting is taking place, meaning the pilot is finally happening. Normally, this kind of news would make anybody happy, but George becomes even more anxious that this pilot will bring down divine retribution upon him.
God will never let me be successful. He'll kill me first. He'll never let me be happy.
I thought you didn't believe in God.
I do for the bad things.
All the way to NBC, Jerry and George see Crazy Joe is now a squeegee man, and he menacingly wishes them luck on their pilot. The casting takes place, and many actors come forward auditioning for each of the characters, including Kramer trying to get the role based on him. Kramer gets diarrhea during the audition and frantically runs from building to building trying to find an empty bathroom. Eventually, he runs through Central Park, and he gets mugged. Even worse, he's now constipated for holding it in for way too long. Later, George visits a doctor because he has an unusual white discoloration on his lip. The doctor doesn't know what it is and wants to do a biopsy, and George immediately thinks that he has cancer, that this proves that God doesn't want him to be successful. At rehearsal, George makes an enemy of the actor playing Kramer by offering unsolicited suggestions. Jerry, playing himself, gets singled out by NBC executive Rita as the weak link in the show because he can't act. Russell doesn't worry about any of this because he's still heartbroken, and later gets rejected again over the phone and fires a hapless assistant in a furious rant. Despite these hiccups, the taping does take place, and Elaine sits in the audience wearing a wig so that Russell doesn't recognize her. The thing is, Russell is nowhere to be found, and hasn't been seen in a very long time. George's test results came back negative, So maybe that's a good sign that God actually does like him. Before they begin, Jerry thanks the audience for coming to the taping of his new show called Jerry. Suddenly, Crazy Joe, who's hiding in the audience, throws himself at Jerry, screaming, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is what John Wilkes Booth said before he shot Abraham Lincoln. Alright, bit of a tangent here. Sic semper tyrannis, Latin for thus always to tyrants, is a phrase that may have originated with the Roman general Brutus while he was assisting in the assassination of Julius Caesar. This is less important, whether or not it's actually true, and more interesting to point out that many theatrical productions at that time were depicting Brutus as saying the phrase. And John Wilkes Booth, an actor himself, was making reference to it during his successful assassination of Abraham Lincoln. He didn't originate the phrase, he was actually intending to make a callback. Anyway, back to the show. A few days later, the pilot airs, and Jerry has a watch party at his place. As Elaine sits on Jerry's couch, she casually finds Morty's long-lost wallet hidden in the couch cushions. It's always the cushions. The pilot airs, recreating various moments from throughout the show, and many characters from past episodes all tune in to watch the pilot.
George. What kind of stupid show is this?
The pilot is amazing, and everyone congratulates Jerry for all of his hard work. But then Rita, another NBC executive, calls Jerry to inform him that because Russell disappeared, she's now in charge. And her first order of business is to cancel Jerry's show. Everybody blames Elaine for breaking Russell's heart, but she argues that it wasn't entirely her fault. If you're wondering where Russell is, he's joined a Greenpeace anti-whaling campaign, confronting a whaling ship and dodging harpoons on his inflatable boat. He's hoping this will impress Elaine enough to take him back, but Russell ends up falling overboard and is lost at sea. His fellow activists swear to tell Elaine of his bravery. So since the pilot didn't work out and George is still unemployed, his savings have finally depleted. In the episode The Puffy Shirt, he has to move back in with his parents, which is a nightmare because George's parents are some of the most insufferable people on the planet.
My mother has never laughed. Ever. Not a giggle, not a chuckle, not a tee-hee. Never went ha.
He goes to dinner with them and has to excuse himself. He then bumps into a woman who gets a good look at George's hands and then decides to make him a hand model.
Smooth, creamy, delicate yet masculine.
Meanwhile, Jerry and Elaine go out to dinner with Kramer and his new girlfriend Leslie, who is a low talker, making it impossible to understand her sometimes.
What's that? Excuse me? Yeah.
Leslie's a fashion designer, who's been developing a puffy, stereotypical pirate shirt, believing that it will be trend-setting. When Kramer steps away to use the bathroom, Elaine mentions that she set up Jerry to perform at a Goodwill benefit to clothe the disadvantaged, and also to promote the benefit on the Today Show. However, all she can do is nod along and agree with Leslie's inaudible replies, unaware that Jerry just agreed to wear the puffy shirt on the Today Show. Later, Kramer unveils the puffy shirt. It looks like the last thing anybody would want to wear on live TV. Jerry tries to explain that he didn't mean to agree to this, but Kramer explains that he can't back out because the trend is already in motion.
Now that's a great looking shirt. Hi, Captain.
As expected, Jerry looks completely ridiculous, and Elaine doesn't help the situation when she walks in the room, takes one look at Jerry, and bursts out laughing. It's not so much that Jerry looks ridiculous, it's the fact that he's about to go on live TV and promote a benefit to clothe homeless people, and right now he looks like a puffed up marshmallow. Meanwhile, at George's photo shoot, he's heralded as the successor of Ray, a legendary former model whose hands became frozen in the shape of a claw because he wasn't master of his domain. What? George assures him that he is the master of his domain because he won a contest.
Yeah, boy.
Jerry reluctantly goes on TV wearing the puffy shirt, and the whole time the host can't stop commenting on how unusual Jerry's shirt is. Jerry then breaks and says the shirt is the stupidest shirt he's ever worn, unaware that Leslie was watching the whole time. She screams at him backstage, and Jerry can finally hear her. George then bursts into the dressing room with his check he earned from the shoot and boasts that he just got a date with a beautiful woman, all because of his perfect hands. George then sees the puffy shirt and calls Jerry an idiot. Leslie finally snaps and pushes George right into a conveniently upright, scalding hot iron. With his hands covered in burns, George's life is right back to rock bottom, and Jerry has to endure being heckled like a pirate for the next few years. In the Cigar Store Indian, Elaine is having some friends over for a poker night, and Jerry is interested in getting together with one of them named Winona. While getting George's table refurbished, Jerry spots a cigar store statue and decides to buy it, as part of an apology gift for Elaine so he can have an excuse to see Winona. Jerry unveils the kitschy Cigar Store Indian, along with an apology card with a peace pipe joke. to a cold reception from Elaine's poker buddies. As he pantomimes tribal chants and dances with the Indian, Winona takes offense and walks out. Obviously. Elaine, appalled, informs Jerry that Winona is Native American. Jerry apologizes to Winona and asks her out, but he then offends a Chinese postal worker by asking for directions to a Chinese restaurant. Worse, Kramer, who gladly took the Indian off Elaine's hands, utters a war cry to show off as his taxi passes by. Hopefully, Kramer learns his lesson, never does anything offensive again.
I mean, aren't we all getting a little too sensitive? I mean, somebody asked me which way is Israel. I don't fly off the handle.
But since this is the early 2000s, I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot more. During this, Kramer had pitched an idea for a coffee table book about coffee tables to Elaine so she could pitch it to her boss. But she didn't because she thought the idea was stupid. But when Kramer is trying to sell the Indian to an actual cigar store, he runs into Elaine's boss, Mr. Lipman. Kramer sells it to Lipman instead and personally pitches his book. Elaine arrives at the office to the horror of Lipman flaunting both the cigar store Indian and Kramer's book, and she ends up assigned to work on it. Moving on to the dinner party, where the gang are on their way to a dinner party on a very cold day. They feel bad about not bringing anything to the dinner, so they decide to get a nice cake and a bottle of wine. They split up into two teams. Jerry and Elaine get the cake, while George and Kramer get the wine. Jerry and Elaine decide to get a nice babka, but they run into problems when they forget to take a number. The bakery runs out of chocolate babkas, and they find a hair in their babka. While they wait for a new one, Jerry decides to eat one of those black and white cookies, and then makes a beautiful speech about how harmonious black and white things are when they go together.
Look to the cookie, Elaine. Look to the cookie.
However, it seems racial equity doesn't sit well with his stomach, and he ends up throwing it up later. What an incredible metaphor for this show. Meanwhile, George and Kramer have a hard time trying to get some wine. Kramer doesn't carry around his wallet because his doctor says it's bad for his back, so George has to pay for it. But all he has is a $100 bill, and the liquor store owner doesn't accept it. They manage to get change and buy the wine, but by then, someone has double parked in front of their car. They wait for what seems like forever in the freezing cold for the owner to move the car, so they decide to wait inside the warm liquor store. The owner doesn't want them just hanging around, not buying anything, and he tells them to leave. And George accidentally knocks over some wine bottles with his expensive, enormous coat. To pay for the wine, he gives the owner his coat. And now both of them have to wait outside in the freezing cold. When the owner of the double parked car does arrive, George is about to lay into him when he stops because the owner is the spitting image of Saddam Hussein.
I wouldn't walk around without a coat in this weather. You'll catch your death of cold. So long.
What a nice guy. George and Kramer rescue Jerry and Elaine at the bakery, but by then, no one wants to go to the party anymore. So they arrive at a friend's place, aptly drop off the food, and they leave. While at the bank in the episode The Marine Biologist, Jerry runs into an alumni from Queens College named Diane. They catch up, and then Diane asks about George. Diane was the pretty girl that everybody wanted to go out with. So to hide how much of a loser George has become since college, Jerry tells her that George is a marine biologist. She becomes intrigued by George and wants to meet him. And when George finds out, he's beyond happy, until Jerry mentions that he has to maintain the lie that he's a marine biologist.
Why couldn't you make me an architect? You know I always wanted to pretend that I was an architect.
During all this, Kramer decides to hit some golf balls into the ocean. However, he sucks at it and is only able to hit one. Regardless of the lie, George decides to go along with it, and he and Diane go for a nice romantic walk along the beach. Eventually, they come across a crowd of people around a beached whale, and the only one who can save it is a marine biologist. Oh my god. Naturally, George's field of expertise in marine biology is in whales, so George is 100% the perfect man for the job. So George goes into the water and somehow saves the whale. He found something blocking its blowhole, so he reached in and pulled it out. One of Kramer's golf balls. Despite George being a hero, he told Diane that he wasn't a marine biologist, and she dumps him right then and there. Ah well. At least George came out of this with one hell of a fish story. Or a mammal story. No, that's stupid. Let's just move on. In The Pie, Jerry's having dinner with his new girlfriend Audrey when he offers her some apple pie. She refuses to have some and intensely shakes her head every time he insists. Jerry can't understand why she doesn't want any, despite Audrey having a sweet tooth. He spends the next day trying to figure out why she didn't want the pie. So during their next date, at Audrey's father's restaurant, he asks her why. She still refuses to answer, and their conversation is interrupted by her father, Poppy. Jerry then goes to the bathroom at the same time Poppy does, and notices Poppy doesn't wash his hands after doing a number 2. He then sees in horror Poppy personally preparing their dinner with unclean hands. When it is served to him, he refuses to eat it, intensely shaking his head like Audrey did. Now he won't explain why, and Audrey assumes Jerry is only doing this to get back at her. A few days later, Jerry finds out Audrey had a slice of apple pie without Jerry at Monk's and decides to confront her about it at Poppy's. She still refuses to explain why, and suddenly a health inspector arrives to see Poppy. Poppy's taken away, and we shall find out what happens in a later episode. The episode The Stand-In isn't as significant of an episode other than it introduces a reoccurring character who's a friend of Kramer's named Mickey Abbott. Here, he and Kramer are working as stand-ins for the soap opera All My Children, where Kramer stands in for the father and Mickey stands in for the son.
Give me a big hug.
However, Mickey is pressured by Kramer to wear lifts in his shoes to increase his height, because the son character is going through a growth spurt and Mickey really wants to keep his job. This sort of thing is frowned upon in the little person community, and he becomes blacklisted by the other little people. This episode also has the iconic moment with Elaine and her date Al. At the end of their amazing date, they're sitting in the car and they lean in for a kiss when Elaine stops and looks down and sees that it is out. Oh my god.
He what?
He took it out.
While Jerry's parents are back in town for a few days before going to Paris in the two-parter The Raincoats, they've made plans to see George's parents before they leave, but as any sane person would do, the Seinfelds have been trying to avoid spending time with them. During this, they meet Elaine's very friendly boyfriend Aaron, who has a weird habit of always talking to everyone in their face, but in a friendly kind of way. Still, kind of off-putting though. Aaron even ends up taking Jerry's parents on a behind-the-scenes tour of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, simply because he's just that nice of a guy. They end up spending a lot of time together, and Aaron's niceness starts to creep Elaine out. When they get back, Kramer says hello to his parents and meets Aaron. Kramer happens to be wearing the beltless trench coat that Morty invented, the executive that wasn't as successful as he hoped that it would be. Morty mentions he has boxes of the trench coats lying around in his house, and Kramer offers to get them sold for a share of the profit. When Kramer is meeting one of his associates, he bumps into George, who's selling his dad's old clothes for some extra money, and accidentally spills that the Seinfelds have been avoiding seeing his parents since they've been there. This makes George furious because it's just inconsiderate, and because he's been trying to get a break from dealing with his own parents.
You know my mother made all this paella?
What is that anyway?
It's a Spanish dish.
During all of this, Jerry's been trying to get some alone time with his girlfriend Rachel, but they've been unable to because his parents are staying at his apartment. Jerry's parents had encouraged him to see Schindler's List, so he takes Rachel along. And next thing they know, they are passionately making out during one of the saddest films of all time. What's worse is Newman happened to be in the audience, and he decided to tattle on Jerry to his parents. Morty and Helen confront Jerry about this. Find out later, Newman also told Rachel's father, completely sabotaging their relationship. Unfortunately, Jerry and his family have bigger problems to worry about. For the past 3 days, they've been waiting for Jack back at the retirement community to send them the trench coats so Kramer can sell them. But he's only just now been able to get into Morty's garage because the key wouldn't work, making him resort to breaking the window to get in. The coats will now be here 1 hour before their plane leaves for Paris. Morty then decides that maybe they should cancel their Paris trip, and Ellen can't believe Morty would do this for just some stupid raincoats. So the coats finally arrive, but the box got damaged on the flight, so the coats are just completely everywhere. They round up all the ones that they can and bring them to Kramer's associate. But he doesn't want to after taking Frank's old clothes because they were covered in moths. Having now missed their flight to Paris over literally nothing, Morty and Helen decide to go back to Florida. Jerry, Elaine, and Aaron see them off, and as they leave, Aaron has an emotional breakdown that parodies the ending to Schindler's List.
This watch could have paid for their whole trip. This ring is one more dinner I could have taken them out to.
This guy has really blurred the line between friend and psychopath. The episode The Hamptons begins with a gang on their way to East Hampton for the weekend to see Elaine's friend's new baby. George's new girlfriend Jane is going with them, and she's very excited because she's hoping to do the dirty with him for the first time. Man, all these one-episode girlfriends are written so badly. Rachel is also going to be there, as Jerry was able to persuade her father to let them still see each other. At the beach house, everyone decides to soak in the sun first, and while George is away, Jane decides to walk around topless in front of everybody. When George finds out that everybody else saw her naked before he did, he demands that Jerry let him see Rachel's rack as compensation. Jerry, of course, refuses. Later, after George has had some time in the cold pool, he overhears that Rachel is changing into her bathing suit in a room and barges in, pretending like it was an accident. Unfortunate for him, fortunately for her, she was still clothed, and Jerry was still in the room. They shoot George out for doing this, and then Rachel asks Jerry where the baby is so that she can see it. Jerry directs her, but accidentally gives her the wrong room to the house, and she walks in on George with his pants down and his baby experiencing the dreaded shrinkage. Wow. George starts freaking out and believes Rachel is going to always see him as that, as he assumes all women don't know what shrinkage is. Over dinner, Rachel whispers something funny to Jane, and George gets paranoid that she told him his package isn't as big as he says it is. Later, Jerry tries to explain to Rachel how sensitive men are about these things that she shouldn't have told Jane. Jane, on the other hand, has suddenly decided to go back to New York, and George tries to explain what shrinkage is to her. So to get back at Jane, she tricks her into eating lobster, which is bad because she's kosher. He then walks in on her naked, finally sealing the sweet revenge. But then Rachel gets the last laugh when they are all on their way back and decide to stop at a tomato stand. Rachel takes this opportunity to throw a tomato at George's head. It's not the most poetic justice, but he certainly had it coming. Season 5 ends with the opposite. Elaine is getting promoted at her job. This also means Kramer's coffee table book is getting published, which is good for both of them. The only one that isn't happy about this is George, who lately has been more depressed than ever as he realizes everything in his life has become the complete opposite of what he wanted. He decides from now on he's going to do the complete opposite of everything in life by starting with ordering a different usual at Monk's Cafe and bravely talking to a pretty girl that was flirting with him.
My name is George. I'm unemployed and I live with my parents.
Surprisingly, this new tactic actually works. He ends up dating the pretty girl, whose name is Victoria. George has now embraced a whole new bad boy persona, and it makes Victoria even more interested in him.
Who are you, George Costanza?
I'm the opposite of every guy you've ever met.
Meanwhile, Kramer's book ends up being so popular that he's invited to appear with Regis Philbin and Kathy Lee on their show. And what's not to like about the book? It's about coffee tables, and the book even transforms into a coffee table, complete with coasters on the cover. I'm sorry. That is so funny that he just basically invented the equivalent of a tray table. Anyway, the show is going great until Kramer drinks some coffee and ends up spitting it all over Kathy. This leads to his book tour being completely canceled. Yikes. By now, everything in George's life is going his way. Turns out Victoria's uncle, Mr. Cushman, works for the Yankees and is offering him the position of assistant to the traveling secretary. It's George's dream job. George maintains his carefree attitude during the interview and even criticizes the Yankees owner, George Steinbrenner, for every bad thing he's done for the organization. Normally, an applicant will be fired over something like this, but Steinbrenner ends up hiring George because of his explosive attitude. This means George can finally move out of his parents' house.
I just want the both of you to know how much you mean to me. And I love you both very, very much. Opposite.
But while everything has been going great for George, everything's been going horribly for Elaine. Her boyfriend just broke up with her. She's getting kicked out of her apartment, and then because of her, the publishing company she works for is getting shut down when her boss is unable to close a deal. She's realized she has become the new George. But Jerry doesn't seem to mind because his life has still found a way to even itself out. Even breaking up with Rachel doesn't seem to faze him. Enjoy it while you can. There's still 4 seasons left. Season 6 begins with the episode The Chaperone. George is still working for the Yankees, and Elaine is still out of work. She and Jerry decide to watch a Yankees game in person, and Jerry happens to strike up a friendly conversation with Miss Rhode Island when she sits near him. Her real name is Karen. They end up going out for a date, but according to pageantry rules, they have to go out with a chaperone. Meanwhile, Elaine gets a job interview at Doubleday, hoping to follow in the footsteps of the late Jackie Kennedy. The interview goes horribly, but on the way out, she meets the older publishing executive Justin Pitt, who becomes completely starstruck upon seeing Elaine, convinced she looks just like Jackie Kennedy.
The resemblance is uncanny.
He offers her a job as his personal assistant, and of course, she immediately says yes. Sadly, her job as his personal assistant turns out to be a nightmare, as he is incredibly picky and impossible to please. Jerry goes out with Karen. They couldn't get a chaperone, so Jerry asks Kramer to be their chaperone, which might have been a mistake because Kramer decides to take his role very seriously, so Jerry doesn't do anything to her. Kramer then spends the entire date giving Karen helpful advice on how she can win the competition, completely ruining Jerry's time with her. Regardless, they all still go with Karen to the competition in Atlantic City and even bring George along. But not Elaine, because she has to find the perfect pair of socks for Mr. Pitt. Yeesh. That night, Jerry and George are trying to sleep, but they can't because there are some birds outside their window that won't stop cooing. So Jerry decides to douse them with a bucket of water, unaware he just killed Karen's dove for her magic act during the pageant. So Karen tries to sing during the talent portion of the competition, but she can't sing. She's awful. In The Chinese Woman, Jerry and Elaine are out grocery shopping when they spot George's dad, Frank, talking to a mysterious man in a cave. Confused as to who Frank was talking to, they inform George about what they saw. George doesn't know why Frank was with a man in a cave, and it deeply troubles him. George confronts his father about what he was doing, but he ignores George every time he brings it up. It's only when he meets Jerry's white girlfriend, Donna Chang, who was coincidentally talking with George's mother, Estelle, because their phone lines crossed, that he learns his parents are getting divorced. George is convinced the man in the cape has something to do with this, but Jerry jokingly defends the cape man because Superman wore a cape and he wasn't evil. Jerry has this weird obsession obsession with Superman. It's a reoccurring gag throughout the show. Anyway, we find out later that the man in the cape is Frank's lawyer, and he wears a cape because he doesn't like to follow trends. Weird. Thankfully, Frank and Estelle divorcing turns out to be a false alarm. Donna spoke with Estelle on the phone again, managed to change her mind by giving Estelle some Confucius wisdom. However, Estelle becomes upset when she discovers she got Chinese wisdom from a woman that isn't Chinese, and decides the divorce is back on. George now has to divide his time between two separate parents, and what's worse, Frank ends up living with him until he can find another place. Poor George. In the episode The Couch, Jerry has finally decided it's time for a new couch in his apartment. As the movers bring it in, Kramer reveals his pizza restaurant idea he had tried to get going all along is finally happening. He's even got support from Poppy, whose restaurant is now the cleanest in New York after the incident with the health department. So Jerry and Elaine decide to pay Poppy a visit and eat at his restaurant. Everything goes pretty well until Jerry learns that Elaine will boycott anybody who isn't pro-choice. Curious, Jerry decides to ask Poppy about his view on abortion, revealing him to be anti-abortion. Elaine walks out in protest, and the other diners overhear the discussion, causing numerous arguments and more people to walk out. The next day, Kramer informs Jerry and Elaine that Poppy's in the hospital because of what they did. So they try to apologize with wine and 5-alarm chili, unaware Poppy has gastrointestinal problems. After everything, Jerry decides to just pay Poppy back for the dinner they were supposed to have at his restaurant. Jerry goes to get the money while Poppy sits on his new couch waiting, and after the transaction is made, Jerry notices a wet spot on his new couch. Ugh. Later, when Kramer is making a pizza with Poppy, Kramer decides to put some cucumbers on his pizza. Poppy objects to this, but Kramer argues that they should encourage any topping regardless of if it will taste good. They then get into a huge argument, which cleverly alludes to the theme of abortion.
What gives you the right to tell me how I would make my pie?
Because it's a pizza.
It's not a pizza till it comes out of the oven.
It's a pizza the moment you put your fish in the dough.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
In the end, Jerry has to take his old couch back after giving it to Elaine. I guess some things are better off the way that they were. While the gang is at Monk's Cafe in the episode The Soup, Jerry sees another comedian he knows named Kenny. Jerry hates Kenny because his jokes aren't funny, and the guy is so annoying. Nevertheless, they end up saying hi to each other, and Kenny offers Jerry an Armani suit.
I can't believe you're giving him this.
I don't even want anything for it.
When Kenny drops it off, Kramer pointed out that Kenny was giving it to Jerry for free, so Kenny randomly decides he wants a free dinner from Jerry without asking Jerry first. At the dinner, Jerry orders the salmon. But then Kenny just orders soup and changes his mind that he wants his free dinner some other time. Jerry becomes furious, argues that soup is a meal, but Kenny doesn't think so. Doesn't want a meal now because he's not as hungry right now. Man, this guy sucks. After much discussion on what constitutes as a meal and what doesn't, Jerry decides he's had enough and gives the Armani suit to Elaine's English boyfriend Simon. Kenny then calls Jerry wanting his suit back, but Jerry refuses because he already gave it to Simon. Kenny finds Jerry and Elaine at Monk's, but Jerry has to remind him that he doesn't have his suit. Simon then walks in wearing it and explains to Elaine that he got a job interview thanks to the suit. He'll be staying in America indefinitely, which is bad for Elaine because he's been a terrible boyfriend. So Elaine shows Kenny that Simon has his suit and he chases after him, leading to a violent confrontation outside the cafe. In the mom and pop store, a dentist friend of our main characters named Walter White, Tim Watley, is having a Thanksgiving party and has invited all of them except for Jerry. But it may have been implied, so they aren't sure if Jerry is actually invited or not. So Jerry calls Elaine, since Elaine has a huge crush on Tim, to see if Tim did invite him, but even she isn't really able to find out. Regardless of not possibly being invited, Jerry just decides to crash. He finds Tim, and even after talking to him, it's still pretty unclear if Jerry was invited.
Did you say, Jerry, I didn't think you'd show? Or Jerry, I didn't think you'd show?
Tim then asks Elaine if she'd go out with him on New Year's Eve, but Elaine's hearing is temporarily gone after doing a loud assignment for Mr. Pitt. So she doesn't understand what he said and shakes her head. He walks away, disappointed. Tim's apartment gets a good view of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, and Jerry accidentally knocks something pointy out of Tim's window, and it pops one of the braid balloons. I think Jerry is no longer welcome at Tim's place. In the episode The Switch, we learn a shocking truth about one of our main characters. George is dating this very attractive model named Nina, whom George says is always stuffing her face whenever they go out to eat, but then has to excuse herself to use the bathroom to freshen up. Kramer suggests that Nina might be bulimic, but George can't know for sure because he can't go into the woman's restroom. George then gets the idea to bribe one of the bathroom matrons to spy on Nina, and that's when Kramer looks like he has an idea. But then quickly puts his hands down. Everyone sees this, which is why Kramer changed his mind, and Kramer reveals his mother, Babs, is a bathroom matron. He hasn't spoken to her in 5 years, still carrying a lot of emotional pain from his childhood. Jerry convinces Kramer to reconcile with his mother, so Kramer and George go to see her. Babs is so startled to see Kramer that the first thing she utters is Kramer's first name. You guys ready for this? Kramer's first name is Cosmo. Both not what I expected, and also it's completely perfect.
Cosmo.
Babs agrees to help George out, but she ends up spending a lot of time with Kramer. She quits being a bathroom matron, ruining George's plan to find out what Nina is doing in there, but this only makes him more desperate to know. He ends up barging into the woman's bathroom and finds Nina actually freshening up, so now George looks like the biggest idiot and Nina dumps him. Meanwhile, Babs runs into Newman on the street. Turns out they both already know each other really well. So well that they resume their romantic relationship, and the gang catches them getting dirty on his couch. Poor Cosmo. In the episode called The Doorman, Jerry is going to pick up Elaine from Pitt's luxurious apartment when the doorman Sal stops Jerry and has an awkward conversation with him.
How about those Knicks? Oh, I see on the sports page.
Yeah.
What makes you think I wasn't reading the Wall Street page? Oh, I know, because I'm the uneducated doorman.
Jerry becomes really scared of Sal's sociopathic mannerisms around him, so much so that he almost doesn't want to go back down to the lobby when he leaves with Elaine. Jerry waits until Sal's shift is done before leaving, only to discover Sal is waiting for Jerry outside, as he just happens to live next door. Jerry's annoyed that Sal won't leave him alone, but Sal keeps bothering Jerry because he's convinced that Jerry thinks that he's better than him. Realizing this is only the beginning, Jerry tries to be friends with Sal, prompting Sal to ask Jerry to cover his shift while he steps out for a second. Jerry then learns that it's not that easy being a doorman. Later, a package is delivered to somebody in the building, and Jerry has to sign for it because he's technically the doorman. The delivery man treats him horribly, and Jerry has had enough, so he abandons his post. Jerry comes back downstairs with Elaine, only to discover that someone stole the lobby couch because no one was downstairs watching the lobby. The building manager blames Sal for being careless until he reveals that it was Jerry that was supposed to be watching the building, showing her Jerry's signature on the package that he signed. This makes Jerry believe that Sal is out to get him, like he belongs to some secret society of doormen. The manager wants Jerry and Elaine to replace the couch, and that's when George gives Jerry the idea to use the new couch that he bought. Remember the one that Poppy peed on? George took the couch and just flipped the couch cushion, and George offers to let them use that one. Really, he's only doing this because he's trying to kick his dad out of his place, as he uses the couch to sleep on it. During all of this, Kramer and George learn that Frank has some very large man boobs. Disgusted by what he saw, George realizes that this is probably genetic and that he will experience the same thing in a few years.
Hey, we're twins. Our shirts, they're the same.
Oh, imagine that.
Kramer then gets the brilliant idea to create a bra for men with this condition and comes up with the male bra, aka the bro. Kramer and Frank present their invention to bra salesman Sid Farkas. Frank prefers to call their product the Manzier, and Kramer, Frank, and Farkas make a deal. Until Farkas asks permission to date Estelle. Angered, Frank cancels the deal and now has to sleep in George's bed because the couch is gone. In the Fusilli Jerry, Elaine informs Jerry that she's now dating his car mechanic friend David Putty. That night when Elaine and David make love, he does the move. A certain move that Jerry used to do when he and Elaine were together. When Elaine tells Jerry, he's furious that David stole his move, admitting that he might have shared some information with David. Elaine, on the other hand, doesn't mind that David is using his move. In fact, she says David has improved it. Jerry confronts David at the car repair shop that he works at and scolds David for stealing his move. David argues that he didn't steal it because Jerry's move is so obvious anyone could have done it. Jerry gets so angry that he decides he's never going to let David fix his car again, but then regrets what he says because on his way home he damages his car. Jerry goes to another mechanic and gets an estimate of $2,800. Obviously, Jerry isn't paying that, so he asks Elaine to subtly ask David what he'd pay to fix Jerry's car. She asks while they were doing the dirty, and David says he could fix it for $1,600. Jerry then forgives David for stealing his move. Nothing is more important than having a good mechanic as a friend. During this episode, Kramer had made Jerry a Fusilli version of himself, and it's now become a hobby of his that he does from time to time, hence why the episode is called Fusilli Jerry.
Why Fusilli? Because you're silly.
The Diplomats Club begins with Elaine finally having enough of Mr. Pitt, so she's decided to quit her job as his assistant. She changes her mind when she finds out Pitt has included her in his will, as she's been like a daughter to him. Aw, Pitt has a cold right now, so he goes to a pharmacy to pick up some medication that won't conflict with his heart medication. Jerry and Kramer happen to be there, as Jerry's going out of town and needs a few things. Kramer accidentally knocks over a stand, and Jerry offers to put everything back while Kramer waits in the car. Pitt walks in right as Jerry's cleaning up and assumes that he worked there. He asks Jerry for the right cold medication, and Jerry, not knowing what Pitt looks like and not being a professional, recommends some medication that's not so good for him. As expected, Mr. Pitt gets even more sick, and as his doctor and estate lawyer, Lenore, attend to him. Elaine finds out what happened and tries to help Pitt, but Lenore doesn't trust Elaine, and becomes convinced that Elaine is trying to kill Pitt ever since she was written into his will. Eventually, Pitt and Lenore find out that Jerry gave them the pills and that Elaine knows who Jerry is. Thinking they purposely tried to kill him, Mr. Pitt fires Elaine, and then we get a sad montage of all the great times they had together, accompanied by Barbra Streisand's song, The Way We Were. Nah, poor Elaine. In the season 6 finale, The Understudy, Elaine suspects that her Korean manicurists are talking smack about her in Korean. So she has Frank eavesdrop after finding out that he speaks Korean from serving in the war, and he confirms her suspicions correct. Instead of feeling guilty, the manicurists get angry at Elaine and kick her out onto the street. Ironically, one of the manicurists happens to be the same woman that Frank had an affair with all those years ago in Korea. Wow, what are the odds? New York's a pretty big place. Elaine, unemployed and unwanted wherever she goes, cries the whole way home in the pouring rain, until she bumps into a dashing man with a voice that could make any woman forget their troubles. He comforts her, and happens to be the man who designed the coat that she's wearing, J. Peterman. They end up bonding later on, and Peterman ends up hiring Elaine to work on his catalog as a writer. So, while that was happening, Jerry and George's softball team are playing against real-life Bette Midler's team, and George charged into her when she was covering home plate. She ended up going to the hospital, wasn't able to perform in her upcoming play Rochelle, Rochelle, which, I mean, at least she got to hang out with Kramer, who's the world's biggest Bette Midler fan. The guy even made her a pasta figurine of her, just like he did Jerry.
What is it? It's Macaroni Midler.
Season 7 brought a new direction to the show's status quo, and the season's first episode, The Engagement, set in motion a story arc that wouldn't get resolved until the end of the season. The episode begins with Jerry and George once again having relationship problems over the smallest thing. Jerry finally hits a breaking point and snaps as he's tired of his life always going sideways. George feels the same way, reveals that he hasn't stopped thinking about Susan, especially since she's no longer a lesbian. Both men decide to do something different with their life and shake hands. George then spends the entire afternoon at the pier watching people in their happy, meaningful lives going by. Realizing what he wants to do with his, he visits Susan and asks her to marry him. She says yes.
I just want you to know that I love your son very much.
You do?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
May I ask why?
George then tells Jerry the good news, and the dude is on cloud 9. However, his mood flips when he hears that Jerry broke up with his girlfriend for something as simple as eating peas one at a time. George becomes furious because he and Jerry had made a pact to change their lives, but Jerry argues all they did was shake hands, which doesn't constitute a pact. George leaves and slowly begins to regret asking Susan to marry him as he's no longer a bachelor anymore.
She's rerunning the Yankee game. You watching this?
George, you coming to bed? I taped Matt about you.
To make things worse, George realizes that he and Susan don't really have a lot in common. During all this, Elaine has been unable to sleep because her neighbor's dog won't stop barking. Desperate for sleep, she turns to Kramer and Newman for help, and they come up with the devious plan to kidnap the dog and drop it off far away. They move the dog somewhere else. The dog turns out to be the world's most loyal dog and manages to find its way back to its owner. Thus, the barking continues. Unfortunately, when they left the dog, it had ripped off a piece of Kramer's shirt, linking him and everybody else to the crime. The episode ends with Elaine, Kramer, and Newman getting arrested. On the bright side, Elaine joins the bandwagon to make some changes to her life.
What took you so long?
In the next episode, The Postponement, Elaine confides with Rabbi Glickman about how she's jealous of George finding love and getting engaged before she did. She also reveals some embarrassing secrets, unaware that Glickman is completely absent-minded and incapable of keeping a secret.
Overwhelmed with feelings of resentment and hostility for her friend. Let's call him George. She felt that George was somewhat of a loser.
Meanwhile, Jerry and Kramer decide to go see Plan 9 from Outer Space. Kramer decides to smuggle some hot coffee from Java World into the theater, and he ends up spilling it all over him. He makes a scene, and a theater usher catches him bringing outside food into the theater and escorts him out. Ironically, this all works out for Kramer, as he's able to get a lawsuit against Java World because the coffee was too hot and the top was faulty. In the next episode, the Maestro, Kramer meets with his lawyer Jackie, and Jackie proposes that Kramer has a strong legal case because the theater took away Kramer's rights as a consumer.
This is a clear violation of your rights as a consumer. It's an infringement on your constitutional rights. It's outrageous, egregious, preposterous. It's definitely preposterous.
However, Kramer's chances of winning disappear when his burn heals after he got a balm from a friend. Jackie scolds Kramer for tending to the wound before the trial, and Kramer tries to apologize. Java World then negotiates an out-of-court settlement, and Kramer, still nervous about winning the case, says yes to their first offer, which is free coffee at any of their stores. This makes Jackie even more upset because Kramer said yes before they were offered monetary compensation. But Kramer doesn't care. He ends up angering every barista when he consumes way too much coffee. Moving on to another great episode, The Soup. There's a new soup place in town that Kramer has been raving about, so Jerry and George decide to check it out. There's just one problem. The owner, yes, Kasem, is very strict about the ordering procedure. If you don't follow the rules, he takes away your soup and kicks you out. Hence why he's called the soup. Normally, a restaurant wouldn't last long if an owner was like this, but this guy's soup is really, really good. Like the greatest soup on the planet. And Kasem is just misunderstood, so it's totally worth it. George ends up not getting any bread with his soup. When he tries to get some, he angers Kasem and gets his soup taken away.
You want bread? Yes, please. $3. What? No soup for you.
George gets a second chance at soup and is successful this time. Elaine goes with him, but doesn't abide by Kasem's rules and completely irritates the guy. Kasem tells Elaine, no soup for you, and bans her for 1 year. Through sheer luck, Elaine gets a hold of Kasem's recipes for all his soups and blackmails him by threatening to expose all of his recipes to the public. Kasem has no choice but to close his soup restaurant and move to Argentina, making Jerry and the others upset because there will be no more soup for them. The episode The Pool Guy begins with Jerry and Kramer in line for a movie when they run into Ramon, the pool guy at Jerry's health club. Ramon informs them that he got fired from the health club, but then spends the majority of the episode trying to be friends with Jerry. Ramon is incredibly annoying, and Jerry tries to avoid hanging out with him until he has to flat out say that he doesn't have any more room in his life for another friend. Ramon is obviously very upset by this and assumes Jerry doesn't want to hang out with him because he cleans pools. Ramon ends up getting his job back as a pool guy and begins making Jerry's life a living hell at the health club. The next time Jerry's in the pool, Ramon aggravates Jerry with a pool stick, prompting Jerry to grab the stick and yank him into the pool. Newman happened to be jumping into the pool at that time and ended up jumping right on top of Ramon, knocking him unconscious. Jerry and Newman have the option to give Ramon CPR, but neither of them have the guts to do it. Eventually, some paramedics come and save Ramon's life, and Jerry's membership at the health club is revoked. In the episode The Sponge, Elaine discovers that the contraceptive sponges she uses every time she makes love are now off the market. Elaine loves the sponge more than birth control, so she scours every drugstore and pharmacy looking for the last sponges in New York. The gods have blessed her, and she manages to find 25 sponges. Later, she's about to do the dirty with a guy that she met named Billy, and despite Billy being pretty great, she can't decide if he's sponge-worthy. See, back then, Elaine could use the sponges whenever she wanted, but now that there's only a handful left, she has to carefully conserve them.
You know you're nuts with these sponges. George is getting frustrated.
She later questions Billy to make sure he's sponge-worthy, and in the end decides to waste a sponge on him. The next morning, Billy wants to go again, but Elaine stops him because you can't afford to waste 2 sponges. I mean, he could always wear a condom, but in all fairness, I guess doubling down is the way to go. Moving on to the episode The Rye, where George and his parents have a nice dinner with Susan and her parents. I said it was a nice dinner, it was actually incredibly uncomfortable because Frank and Estelle still don't have a filter. The Costanzas brought some rye bread to share with the dinner, but Susan's parents never served it during the dinner. Angry that they forgot to serve the bread, Frank decides to take it back with him, making George and his family seem even more like bad people. By the way, Frank and Estelle are back together through some unexplained reason, so the divorce storyline was all for nothing.
Now because of that stupid rye bread, I gotta keep them all separated for the rest of my life.
George then comes up with a plan to sneak a rye bread into the Rosses' home without them knowing, as if the rye was there all along. Everything goes smoothly. Kramer takes the parents on a romantic carriage ride around Central Park, but Jerry isn't able to acquire a rye bread when an old lady takes the last rye bread at a bakery. So Jerry resorts to stealing it.
Shut up, you old pig!
Jerry makes his way to George, but has to hide when the Ross's carriage ride gets cut short. Kramer decides to give the horse canned beef. Let's just say it didn't sit well with the horse. Jerry then has to toss the rye up to their apartment window where George is, but he can't throw the rye bread high enough. George then gets the idea to use a fishing pole and a hook so that they can hook the rye bread onto the hook and then reel it in, unaware that Susan and her parents are watching them the whole time. Whoops. In the two-parter, The Cadillac, Jerry gets paid a lot of money for a show that he did, so he decides to give his parents a brand new Cadillac. Man, Jerry is really going for Son of the Year over there. However, this really nice gesture makes Morty and Helen the most hated people in the community. Jack starts a rumor that Morty's been stealing funds from their treasury because he's a brand new Cadillac. Morty tries to explain that Jerry bought it for him, but no one believes him because they all believe Jerry is not good enough of a comedian to make a lot of money. The other members decide to vote on whether or not to impeach Morty. Luckily, there's one undecided vote that could save him, so they invite Mabel to their home, hoping to persuade her not to impeach Morty. Coincidentally, Mabel happens to be the old woman that Jerry stole the rye bread from. Jerry leaves before she can recognize him. At the vote, Mabel finally remembers that Morty's son was the one who robbed her and she changes her vote. Morty is stripped of all of his titles, and Jack is named the new condo president. The episode ends with the Seinfelds being forced to leave the condo community in their Cadillac in a scene that parodies the ending to the movie Nixon. They end up moving to a new condo community in Florida. During all of this, Elaine's friend Katie tells George that if he weren't engaged, she would hook up with her friend, who's really into short, bald guys. George doesn't think too much about it until Katie reveals that her best friend is Oscar-winning actress Marisa Tomei. He spends the next few days fantasizing about having a life with her, but he can't because he's engaged to Susan. One more reason why he regrets being engaged. He finally gets so desperate that he gets Katie to arrange a date with him and Marisa Tomei, and then has Elaine help him create an alibi in which he was meeting with Elaine because she needed advice with her relationship with the world's most famous importer-exporter, Art Vandelay. George has the date with Marisa Tomei, but she leaves when he mentions that he's already engaged. Susan then finds out about it and punches him. Man, he got off easy. The big day is almost here for George and Susan in the episode The Invitations, and George is still regretting ever proposing to Susan. Jerry tells him that he should end it if he feels this way, but George can't bring himself to do it, cause he is a coward. George contemplates writing Susan a letter saying that he's moved to China and is very, very sorry. Again, a coward. All this talk about George getting married makes Jerry realize at some point it's just going to be him and Kramer all alone together. Elaine still has plans on finding somebody. Jerry imagines a future with just him and Kramer living together, and he absentmindedly walks into the street and is saved by a woman before he gets run over. Her name is Jeannie Steinman, and they both realize that they have so much in common, from having the same initials to having the same usual at Monk's. I guess you could say Jerry is finally in love. All it took was to find somebody who was just like him.
Now I know what I've been looking for all these years. Myself.
Later, Jerry goes out to the exact same spot George was at when he got the idea to propose to Susan, and seeing people in their happy, meaningful lives go by, he decides to propose to Jeannie. She says yes, but then regrets it when he becomes exhausted with basically dating himself, which we all saw coming. Meanwhile, George has been trying many ways to get out of marrying Susan, like getting her to hate him for smoking cigarettes, but nothing seems to work. Finally, Kramer tells him that women hate it when men ask them to sign a prenuptial, so George races home to Susan to ask her to sign one. Susan then laughs in his face because Kramer never told George that prenuptials cost a lot of money. Later, George leaves Susan to mail all the invitations, and she passes out from all the envelope licking. George finds her unconscious at home and rushes her to the hospital, where she is pronounced dead? Apparently, they bought really cheap invitations, and the glue that was used was toxic, so that's what killed her. George doesn't know how to take this news because this is what he wanted, but not like this. Jerry, on the other hand, is upset because now he's engaged and George is not. George laughs in his face because this was the same exact predicament that he was in at the beginning of the season. Now single, George tries to go out with Marisa Tomei, but she hangs up immediately. Season 8 begins with the episode The Foundation, where Susan's parents are still mourning the loss of their daughter, but George doesn't feel anything or seem to miss her at all, because he's a coward. George is ready to move on from this, get on with his life, and Jerry was able to get out of his engagement to Jeannie because they both mutually hated each other. As George celebrates being a bachelor again, Susan's parents decide to honor her memory by creating a foundation. Jerry had said something profound during her funeral, and unaware it was a direct quote from Spock's funeral in Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, it inspired them to keep Susan's memory alive. They want George to sit on the board of directors, and George has no choice but to say yes because he's uncomfortable with refusing. Then again, this could just be Susan's family getting back at George because they blame him for Susan's death. Meanwhile, Elaine has still been working for Peterman, but recently the guy has been having a nervous breakdown. He ends up running off to Burma, leaving the company leaderless. Kramer gives her the idea to run the company while Peterman has a midlife crisis, and Elaine instantly embraces this idea. She puts her idea for an urban sombrero on the cover of their catalog, and it immediately backfires. I mean, just look at that thing. In The Bizarro Jerry, Jerry goes on a date with another of Elaine's friends, Jillian. The date goes pretty well, but Jerry is constantly put off by Jillian's bizarre man hands. He decides to just be friends with her. She's okay with this. George then calls Jerry, asking for another picture of Jillian. During all of this, George had been using Susan's death to gain sympathy from pretty women and go on dates with them, but he's been using a picture of Jillian instead. He actually burned the last one, so he begs Jerry to get him another. But when Jerry reaches into Jillian's purse, she catches him and practically breaks his hand with her strong man hand. Aside from Elaine meeting the gang's doppelgangers, the episode isn't very significant, so let's just move on. The Little Kicks opens with George accompanying Elaine to a company party. Elaine makes a great toast, then the dance music starts playing. Elaine encourages everybody to dance, but no one wants to. So Elaine takes the dance floor and horrifies everybody with her remarkable dance moves. Later, George tells Jerry that Elaine danced, and it brings back PTSD from when Jerry first witnessed Elaine's bizarre dance moves. Elaine's staff starts to lose respect for her, and Elaine is convinced that George is infecting her staff, completely oblivious to the fact that it was her dance moves that started alienating everybody. Kramer and Jerry finally break the news to Elaine that her dancing sucks, and videotapes herself to see if they're right. However, Kramer had introduced Jerry to the magical world of bootlegging movies in theaters, and she taped over one of their recordings. The black market is introduced to her dancing, and everyone makes fun of Elaine behind her back. In The Chicken Roaster, Elaine is still in charge because Peterman is still in Burma having his midlife crisis. Since then, Elaine has been abusing the company's money and buying personal items and things for herself. Accounting confronts her about her exploits, but Elaine tries to argue that everything she has brought for herself has been for the benefit of the company. She gets so out of control that the board of directors has no choice but to fire Elaine. So Elaine makes the journey to Burma and braves the dangerous jungle to find Peterman. She finds him now as a crazy warlord, parodying Marlon Brando's character from Apocalypse Now.
You're an errand girl sent by grocery clerks to collect a bill.
Actually,
She gets him to sign off on the purchases that she made, and she's able to keep her job. In The Abstinence, George is dating a girl named Louise, but they can't make love because she has mono. So George has to wait 6 weeks before he can do it with her. At first, this upsets him, but then he learns that when his mind isn't prioritized on lovemaking, he becomes incredibly smart.
Your brain consists of 2 parts. The intellect, represented here, and the part obsessed.
The guy is even able to help a real-life Derek Jeter perfect his swing. He's a completely new man. During this, Elaine has been having abstinence with her boyfriend, Ben Gelfin, and instead of making her smarter, she's been getting dumber. Jerry realizes why. Men don't need to make love, but are easily distracted by it and reduced to Neanderthals. Women need to make love because they have all this garbage floating around in their head, and unless it's thrown away via they remain dumb. Right.
The sidewalk is blocked. Nothing's getting through. You're stupid.
I don't understand.
Exactly.
Elaine gets so desperate for intelligence that she comes to Jerry asking if they can make love. Jerry is against it because the circumstances are just really weird. Louise is finally able to make love, but by now George doesn't have the sexual urge anymore, so she leaves him. George then makes love with a Portuguese waitress at Monk's, but only because he had calculated his odds of ever getting it on with the Portuguese waitress. Alright, dumb George is back. In the episode The Pothole, Kramer becomes the proud owner of a 1-mile stretch of the Arthur Burkhardt Expressway. Kramer now has to keep it clean, but doesn't trust the city's maintenance crew, so he plans on cleaning it all by himself. Later, he repaints the 4-lane highway to 2 extra wide lanes, which only creates more traffic and chaos. Because, as stated, it's only for 1 mile. To avoid getting in trouble with the city, Kramer steals a giant keg of paint thinner to erase the new lines. Elaine is driving at that moment, and an old sewing machine fell from her car. Kramer accidentally spills the paint thinner all over the highway, right as Newman is driving down in his mail truck. Newman doesn't see the sewing machine and gets caught on the truck, creating sparks. Combined with the paint thinner, the truck catches fire and Newman gets burned. He lives, but the experience has definitely scarred the guy for life. Moving on to the episode The English Patient, Elaine and her boyfriend Blaine go on a movie date. Blaine really wants to see The English Patient because it won 9 Oscars, but Elaine would rather see the comedy Sack Lunch. Sadly, Sack Lunch gets sold out, so they have to watch The English Patient. Elaine thinks that it's the worst movie ever made, but Blaine thought it was incredible. Her dislike for The English Patient alienates her from everyone, and Blaine dumps her. By now, Peterman is back from his pilgrimage to Burma and has taken back the head position of the company from Elaine. Elaine continues to kiss his butt like she does with every boss, and when he turns out to be a big fan of The English Patient, he asks Elaine if she liked it. Elaine doesn't know what to say, since she hated it, so she says she hasn't seen it yet. So Peterman decides to take Elaine to see it again. Watching it a second time was worse than the first time, and Elaine goes on a rant about how terrible the movie is.
Quit telling your stupid story about the stupid desert and just die already. Die!
Peterman fires her for not liking the movie, and Elaine doesn't care because it means she can stop watching it. Later, she's able to get her job back when she agrees to go with him to the Tunisia desert, which is where the movie was filmed. On the flight, Elaine finally gets to watch Sack Lunch, but then the plane gets hijacked. Oh my god. In the episode The Yada Yada, George's new girlfriend Marcy likes to say yada 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 to shorten her stories. George can't understand why she does this, as yada 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 could mean literally anything, but he still uses it to avoid mentioning Susan's death. During one conversation, Marcy mentions her ex-boyfriend came over last night, and then yada yada yada. She's really tired today. George is certain yada 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 means that she made love with her ex-boyfriend, and Elaine confirms he might be right, because she's yada 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 the same thing.
Yeah.
met this lawyer, we went out to dinner, I had the lobster bisque, we went back to my place, yada, yada, yada. I never heard from him again.
So George has Marcy explain all of her stories, including the yada 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 parts, and learns she's a shoplifter. Later, Marcy gets arrested as a shoplifter, and yada yada yada. George won't be able to see her for 6 to 8 months. In the episode The Millennium, the Mets management meets with George wanting to make him head of scouting. However, because George is still working for the Yankees, George will have to get himself fired in order to take the position. So George decides to go out in a blaze of glory and tries various ways to get fired, such as ruining Babe Ruth's uniform and running through Yankee Stadium during a game wearing nothing but a flesh-colored bodysuit.
God, George.
Now check that, he's not streaking, he's wearing a flesh-toned body stocking. Apparently he's a bit bashful, and oddly, no one seems up.
Unfortunately, all this does is make Steinbrenner like him even more. George finally gets Steinbrenner's attention when he hitches one of the Yankees' World Series trophies to his car and he destroys it. Steinbrenner is about to fire him when George's supervisor, Wilhelm, bursts into the room and takes the blame for it. Turns out Wilhelm was also approached for the scouting job, so he gets fired instead. On the bright side, George takes Wilhelm's old job. So, well, I guess it's a win-win for everybody. In the next episode, The Muffin Tops, Jerry and George are randomly walking down the street when a man asks George to watch his luggage. The man never comes back, but inside the suitcase are some really nice clothes. George decides to wear them, but they're the kind of clothes that makes everyone assume that you're a tourist. He gets mistaken for one of the street, and it irritates him, till he gets mistaken by a cute girl named Marianne from the New York Visitor Center. George then pretends to be visiting from Arkansas and works for Tyler Chicken. He tries to go out with Marianne, but she refuses because she thinks George doesn't live here. So George reveals he's moving to New York. Marianne doesn't think it's a good idea because New York is a dangerous place to live.
You're moving to New York? That's fantastic. I can see you all the time now.
Nevertheless, George is determined to be with this girl, so he moves to New York despite already living in New York. So George pretends to get an apartment and a job with the Yankees as if he was getting it for the first time, and it all impresses Marianne. However, Steinbrenner finds out that George is apparently working for him and a chicken restaurant in Arkansas, and he calls the owner of Tyler Chicken saying that he can't have George. Tyler doesn't know who George is, but deduces that George must be important to Steinbrenner. So Steinbrenner agrees to convert all Yankees concessions to Chicken free of charge in exchange for George working exclusively at Tyler Chicken. So George loses his job with the Yankees but gets to keep the job at Tyler Chicken that he never had. To make things worse, he never gets together with Marianne. The episode The Summer of George begins with George getting a 3-month severance paycheck from the Yankees. George decides to treat the next 3 months as a 3-month vacation, declaring the summer as the Summer of George. During this, Jerry's been seeing a girl named Lynette after she broke up with her boyfriend. She begins to wear Jerry out with her busy lifestyle, so George suggests that they team up, with George acting as Jerry's dating intern. When Lynette needs invitations to a party, George picks them up, but on the way back to his apartment, an invitation falls out and lands on the stairs. George slips on the invitation and falls, sending him to the hospital. Once again, invitations have betrayed him. The doctors, the same doctor who informed George of Susan's death, tells George his legs were in a state of atrophy because of his inactivity, and due to the resulting trauma, he may only walk again with enough hard work and perseverance. During the credits, we see George recovering as he participates in physiotherapy. Good thing he had 3 months to spare. Season 9 begins 3 months later, and Jerry, George, and Kramer decided to grow mustaches, which they admit was a bad idea, so they shaved them off. George is back on his feet, is now using a cane. According to George, canes are sexier than crutches. He ends up getting a job with a playground company, Play Now, who only hires him because they think he's disabled. George accepts the position, but only because he will get to use his own private disabled bathroom. We all know how much the guy loves private bathrooms.
You should see the bathroom they gave me.
How can you do this?
Jerry, let's face it, I've always been handicapped. I'm just now getting the recognition for it.
Eventually, the owner of Play Now, Mr. Tomasulo, catches George not being disabled, so George has to convince him that both his legs are injured. Thus, he gets to ride around in a scooter.
Well, it must be comforting to know you'll be going straight to hell at no more than 3 miles an hour.
Later, George accidentally pisses off a number of elderly people that get around on scooters, kicking off the world's slowest chase scene.
We have to warn him, and fast!
The battery on George's scooter dies, so he has to run, and just happens to run right past his boss. George is exposed as a fraud and loses his job at Play Now. Meanwhile, Elaine has still been dating David all this time, and the two of them are on their way back from their vacation in Norway. Sadly, Elaine has had enough of David and his mechanic talk, so she breaks up with him. The breakup devastates him, making the 22-hour-long flight back home incredibly awkward. The two of them begin hitting on the people sitting next to them, and somehow they end up getting back together. But then, 20 minutes later, they break up again. This is gonna happen a few more times throughout the season.
Oh, please! I took you back! You know it! I know it! Vegetable lasagna here knows it!
The episode The Merv Griffin Show begins with Jerry and Kramer casually walking down the street when Kramer spots in a nearby dumpster set pieces belonging to the old Merv Griffin show. He ends up taking everything back to his apartment and arranges them in his apartment.
Jerry, look! Merv Griffin's cigar!
Kramer ends up creating the set of the Merv Griffin show in his apartment and pretends the show is on the air, only talking to his friends as if they were guests on the show. The gang talks about what's going on in their lives. George is dealing with a girl that makes him take care of a squirrel when he accidentally runs it over. Elaine is dealing with a Siddler employee, and Jerry is dating Celia, a girl with a vintage toy collection, and ends up drugging her repeatedly so that he can play with the toys. What?
Ladies and gentlemen, it's our good friend, George Costanza.
Eventually, their day-to-day lives don't become interesting enough, so Kramer has to bring on special guests and celebrities, which is really weird for them because there aren't any cameras, and this is not a real set. Kramer then gets Jerry to admit that he's been drugging Celia to play with her toys, and then brings her out for backstage, where she chews him out for drugging her. George then brings a squirrel on stage, and the guest animal training can contain his hawk, so it attacks George and the squirrel. The squirrel and the hawk end up destroying the set, and Kramer's dream of being a talk show host completely ends. What a weird episode. In the episode The Strike, we learn all about the most magical holiday of the year, Festivus. Back when George was young, Frank hated all the commercial and religious aspects of Christmas, so he invented his own holiday called Festivus. It's somewhat similar to Christmas, except instead of a tree, Frank puts up an aluminum pole. The only gift-giving are a bunch of insults. The holiday ends with the great feats of strength in which someone, usually George, must fight Frank and try to defeat him. It's the most wonderful time of the year, and definitely doesn't explain why George turned out the way he did. Kramer hears about Festivus and becomes very intrigued by it. He works with Frank to resurrect the holiday, which brings back all the PTSD George endured from that holiday. Sometime later, George got caught scamming his new boss, Mr. Kruger, and George blamed everything he did on all the trauma that he endured during Festivus. Not believing George has to invite Kruger to the Festivus celebration at his parents' house in order to prove it. Everyone else is there, and it's a merry time of celebration and insults. Moving on to the show's most controversial episode, the Puerto Rican Day. Jerry and the gang are on their way back from a Mets game when they accidentally get trapped in the Puerto Rican Day parade. The entire episode is them trying to get out of the massive gridlock of cars, but no matter what they do, they end up getting even more trapped than before. Aside from the episode making very racist jokes toward Puerto Ricans, the reason why this episode is controversial is because at one point, Kramer accidentally burns the Puerto Rican flag. He tries putting the flag out by stomping on it, but that makes him look even more sus. Kramer's chased through the streets, and Jerry's car ends up being totaled. And now we've come to the show's finale, called The Finale. Another controversial episode. The episode begins with Jerry getting a call from the new president of NBC, James Kimbrough, who wants to air their long-last pilot of Jerry. They give Jerry and George a 13-episode commitment, and the two of them make plans to move to California and decide to bring Elaine and Kramer with them. Newman hears they're all moving to California and wants to come with, but Jerry refuses to take him, so Newman curses Jerry that his day of reckoning is going to come. They fly to Paris on their new private jet, and everyone loves the jet except for George, who was expecting something a bit more. Before they got on, Kramer had gone to the beach and gotten water in his ear, and it's still in there. During the flight, he tries getting out of his ear by jumping up and down in the airplane and accidentally stumbles into the cockpit, bumping into the pilots. The plane suddenly nosedives straight down, but he embraced the fact that they're going to die.
Kramer! It was an accident! I told you to stop what happened!
Oh my God, we're going down!
Thinking that this is the end, George makes a deathbed confession and admits to Jerry that he cheated on the contest. This means Jerry won the contest all those years ago. Elaine is about to admit something to Jerry, but then the plane levels out. They make an emergency landing in Massachusetts, and everybody celebrates that they're not gonna die. Well, yet. As they decide what to do next, they witness a fat man named Howie getting his car stolen. They don't bother to help him and instead make fat jokes while Kramer captures the whole thing on his camcorder. Nice. Howie tells a nearby officer what happened, and then the officer arrests the gang for violating the newly enacted Good Samaritan law, which requires bystanders to help out a random stranger in need. The gang faces a maximum fine of $85,000 and as much as 5 years in prison. So Kramer decides to call the best lawyer he knows, Jackie. Their trial reaches national news, and the four of them are dubbed the New York Four. Jackie comes prepared to defend them, and the judge's name just happens to be Art Vandelay. What are the odds? During the trial, the prosecuting attorney, Hoyt, addresses the jury and condemns Jerry and the others for violating the Good Samaritan law, adding that this isn't the first time that they've mocked and maligned other people. Hoyt then calls forward almost every single side character from the last 9 years to testify against them, from Marla the Virgin to Bubble Boy to Qasim the Soup to Babu Bat. I told you he'd get his revenge one day.
They're not human. They're very bad.
After hearing all the damning testimony, the jury finds Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer guilty. Judge Vanderlei sentences them to 1 year in prison to think about how insufferable they've been to society. I guess they aren't going to be doing that pilot after all. As they wait to be transferred, Jerry notices George's shirt isn't buttoned right. They both realize they're having the exact same conversation in the show's very first scene.
Haven't we had this conversation before?
You think?
I think we have.
Yeah, maybe we have.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I thought that ending sucked. Then again, how do you make a satisfying ending to a show about literally nothing? Regardless, a lot of the show is pretty iconic. I legitimately think that a ton of it is very funny, and that most of it is best left in the past. Anyway, like and subscribe, feel free to click on the video on screen to watch one of our other videos, and I'll see you guys next time. See ya!